I know that we have more folks online today. And when I'm up and about in the room or typing, it's always a little challenging for me to also track hands up. So Kimberly is often good to alert me, but also want to encourage folks who are online that want to get in the queue to speak up, just so I know that you're wanting to get in line. Looks like we may have a few more people virtually today than we have on most of these meetings. Okay, Tom. So, as always, we have a ambitious agenda and not enough time to fill it probably, or meet it, match it, align it. But we're gonna go as quickly as we can, as efficiently as we can through it all. I'm just gonna put up these slides. I'm sure you've memorized them by now. Our purpose, our outcomes. Delegate Lopez won't be here today. Delegate Foley should be here, I think, shortly. Just a reminder on what the letter of intent has asked us to do around timeliness, deadlines, benchmarks, opportunities, etc. Our ground rules, in general, I think we've done a good job following these, but in these last few meetings can be really important as we're moving towards agreement on keeping the conversation intentional and with goodwill. Just a reminder, this meeting is 3 hours. The next two meetings are 3 hours, so it's an hour shorter. And we spent the last few weeks trying to figure out how do you cram a 4 hour agenda into a 3 hour agenda. So we'll see how we do. So we're going to spend the first hour and a half again just going through the categories as we have before. I'm going to allot approximately 25 minutes for the discussion on each and hope we can stay within that as best as possible. We'll have a short 10-minute break at 11, go back into discussions for a couple more items till 12:15, and then want to wrap up by sharing an initial proposal for what consensus might mean here with this group. And then also just get clear on what we all see based on what we accomplished today, what the top agenda items should be, top categories should be for the 20th. So last time, if you need to refresh your memory from pre-Labor Day, we finished the notice process. We took on intake, resolutions and conditions, certified site plan, and got about halfway through permitting, which is where we're going to start today. Our group, as always, meets multiple times in between meetings, so we've done a slight reordering of the list of topics based on the feedback we got at the end of the meeting. We still got 30 plus more public comments between mid-August and September 1st. We've categorized them, but haven't figured out the impact on summary bullets and whether they all fit within the categories we already have, but we will bring that back to you next week. We began compiling recommendations thanks to Christina and some of the other folks on our small planning team. Hopefully by a week from today, you'll be able to see the initial draft list of that. There's trying to get the language just right, etc. And obviously in this meeting and next meeting, we're hopefully going to be adding some additional recommendations to that list. So the compilation is a kind of an ongoing process and challenge. And then also we began discussing what the final report will look like based on some conversations we've had in this group and just kind of what makes sense in the very tight time frame we have after the 27th of September to get things done. So this is just kind of a summary. These are the categories we've already talked about on the left-hand column. On the right-hand column are the things that we prioritize that we are really trying to make sure we address in this meeting and the meeting on the 20th. It's still a pretty lengthy list, and that still leaves a whole bunch of categories that we're not clear we're going to actually have time for. And we've had some internal conversations about what happens with all of that, wherever we land by the 20th, to make sure that on the 27th, all of our time is focused on approving or not approving each of the different draft recommendations. Again, what we're going to be doing for each of the categories that we addressed today, we're going to be looking at this. I'll have it up and be typing notes in it. I've got copies here. We're gonna be looking mainly at the summary comments and trying to address each of those in the best way possible. If you need to dig into the spreadsheet itself, there are a few copies here. You should have updated version that I sent out on Monday. So if you feel like something somehow got missed in the summary, you can bring that back into the conversation. But we're mainly going to be focusing on the summary bullets because we believe it does a good job of kind of summarizing the many comments that we've gotten. Let's see, do I have another slide here? Yeah, so this is Steve's ideal version of the agenda. 25 minutes public involvement, 25 minutes East County, 25 minutes lead agency coordination, 25 minutes amendments and administrative, and giving you a 10-minute break. Good person that I am. And then in that, at least on the prioritized list that we've done so far, these would be the next 4 categories that we'd address on the 20th. Obviously, any carryover also goes in here, and then whatever else we can address in that right-hand column that I just shared. So I think that's my last slide to get us grounded here. Is that right? Yes, it is. So any questions, comments before we begin?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So good morning, everybody.
Hi.
So as I look at your agenda, and I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, I think probably one of the most important topics of this entire process is the agency coordination and lead agency. We've spent so much time on so many other things, and as I look at this, you're intending to spend 25 minutes on it. Am I interpreting it correctly?
You are. So the 25 minutes, which is, like I said, it's ideal, but it's all these 25-minute segments are based on the fact that we have not even begun to get near the halfway point of all the categories. So any time we spend any more than 25 minutes we spend on any of these categories means we're going to be addressing even fewer categories going forward. So we try to figure out what's a reasonable allocation of time for all the categories, knowing we could do a whole meeting probably on each of these categories, right? But we don't have the time to do that.
But if we've identified that lead agency is an area where there seems to be some disconnect, and one of probably the most important point in terms of time of process smoothness, if you will, and getting through the process effectively and meeting the needs of community and government and applicants and everybody, why are we spending so much time on other things as opposed to this item, which in my personal opinion is a significantly important item?
So I guess my first response would be, I think different people in this group have different ideas about which ones are the most important. So I'm trying to kind of juggle all of those different perspectives. I guess the second thing I would say, especially with regard to lead agency, so I think there's already been a commitment as a result of previous conversations about lead agency in this group, that there will be an interagency group that works after October 1st to iron out a lot of those things. To me, I think the best use of our time on lead agency would be, are there specific areas of guidance that this group wants to provide for the conversations that interagency group has? So I understand, clearly to me as an outsider, lead agency is a really important issue. It's come up before, Like I said, all of these deserve more time than we can give them. I'm not sure we can give that a lot more time today.
Okay, I've
hope
said my
that
piece. It
satisfies.
strikes me, I think that from how I read the first letter to where we stand today, there's been a significant mission creep, but if that's the will of the group, I'm not going to get in its way for sure.
Okay. Meredith.
I had not understood the 25 minutes to be a statement on the weight to be given to each of these issues. I thought it was just a guideline to try, to allocate our time so we could cover everything. Some of them might take a very short time. I agree with Diane that agency coordination, agency, one of the primary concerns in this group. It's mentioned in the letter of intent, something that was supposed to. If we go back to the comments, there are comments, most comments, I believe, are on either lead agency intake. And I think
it was public involvement and then environment. So it was in probably the top 6 or 7, but it was not the top 1%.
But what I'm saying is it's sort of what got us here. Strong belief that the conflicts slow down the process. We actually have data to show. So I agree, we need to take that in.
Okay, so let me ask Pam to go next.
And I'm going to be brief because the more we do this, the less time we have to actually get to the bulleted items on our deliberation list today. But what I'll just say is if everyone's had this chart for 2 to 3 weeks now, and while I agree, lead agency is exceedingly important, it has been brought up multiple times, but it also spills over into other things. We all agreed, I believe, last week that we wanted to raise public involvement higher on the list, so it is. And it has an equal number of bullets as some of these other categories, and you've all had these bullets, you have the list. So I'm not saying that it's any less important, more important. It's just we've set up kind of a way to start approaching things, and if we don't start talking, we're never going to get through it.
So the 25 minutes is a rule of thumb. I think we acknowledge that hopefully some can go quicker. Some may go a little longer, but we just need to realize as a group, every time we go longer with something, it probably means something else is just completely going to fall off the list. And I'm going to look to the group to decide, are we okay with that? But I think to Pam's point, let's dig into the agenda. Lead agency will be, we will address it today. We'll see where we are on time. If it needs more than 25 minutes, I'll check in with the group and we'll see how far we need to go with it. Okay. All right. So first off is going to be finishing off permitting. So let me just bring up my document here. All right, so last time there are 5 bullets under permitting. We addressed, but probably not fully addressed, 3 of them last time. We have actually 3 to go. So no, I'm sorry, we addressed 2. We have 3 to go. I'm not going to try to summarize what we talked about last time. But let's go in the order of this Word document. So this one is move subdivision review functions of MCDOT to DPS and integrate right-of-way permitting into a single process and agency. So I'm going to ask, I know Isan, I think you're online today, and Tim's actually in a different seat today. Wow, okay. Trying to reorient my brain here to the seating assignment. I'd ask Tim and Isan to kind of open up and then see where the discussion goes. And I'm going to start tracking time and we'll see how we do in 25 minutes.
So Steve, if you don't mind, good morning, everybody. I think before we get to the team's issue, which is the subdivision review function, the issue was the bonding of the right-of-way as part of the plats approval. Okay. So that was something that we were going to look into it. We discussed it. So we had I think a great meeting yesterday, myself, Christina, Gary, and Kate, and our right-of-way folks. we discuss, hey, how we can improve the process so we are not adding any more time to the approval of the plats. So as a result of that, we drafted the language that I think the group is looking at it, but I think 99% they blessed it. This would be done all administratively by DPS, and this change would DPS would be able to approve and process the required bond administratively within a few days, which would reduce the record plat approval time drastically. And they can start the bonding of the right-of-way at any time during the process that they start for the site plan review process with Park and Planning.
Say that last part one more time, Isam.
So they can start the bonding for the right-of-way at any time when they start the process with the site plan review process with Park and Planning. As long as they have identified the roads and the infrastructures, it would be very simple. They don't have to submit comprehensive drawings, a site plan, anything like that would be sufficient. And we can perform the cost estimate. We can perform the cost estimate and have it for them to get the bond approved. Gary was there, Kate was there, Christina. If I'm missing anything, I would like to hear if they have anything or they agree with what I just said.
No, I think it's a great step. I think it's a really good resolution, Hassan.
Excellent. And I think I updated this information as part of your document. If you don't have it, I will send you a write-up on that, Steve. So you would have it and you can include it in your in your document.
That would be great. Thanks so much, Isan. And glad. I mean, I think this is a really good example of some work getting done in between meetings to see what we can move along. Kate?
I just wanted to, Isan, I just sent you just some very, very minor tweaks to the language. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. So but
Okay.
I echo what they said, but just wanted to make sure that the right version of that gets posted.
Great. Okay.
Thank you, Kate.
Now, I believe the rest of the meeting can go like that. All right.
So
Thank
I
you
can
very
give
much.
that time. I can give that time for the lead agency, Steve.
Tim's gonna take the rest of the 25 minutes.
Right. All right. So, so the next one is about moving the subdivision review functions.
Sure. So this is actually not been the first time this has been come up. In fact, when DPS was created, the discussions were centered around just this very thing. And there are certain functions that DOT is responsible for, and that in the review of, a development application or any change to the transportation network, there's an operational component to it that I've never seen anybody other than the people that operate the system be able to understand and implement. And for those reasons, this is the decided to not transfer those positions to DPS when DPS was created. First place, because number one, they were required to actually operate the system, and that's where the technical expertise is. And two, once we lost that, if you lose that strong connection between the operations, you're going to lose the ability to actually perform an effective review. And so, this is just, it's come up time and time again. The development review function has lived in different divisions within DOT, trying to find the optimum place for it. It's been in traffic where the had a close nexus to the people that operate the signals. It's been in engineering where it's had a close nexus to the people that are doing the CIP. And so there's good coordination and communication between CIP projects. And it's currently in our director's office because we found that that's the only place that can touch all of the operating parts of our divisions. It ties into parking, it ties into traffic engineering and operations, it ties into our capital, ties into transit. And in order to do effective reviews, we have to have that strong nexus between the operating position. And it's just something that we considered multiple times over the years, and it's just the right spot for this limited portion of our review is within DOT.
We open it up to questions or comments. Gary?
It's not necessarily the review, Tim, but the engineering. Yeah, thank you would, but it's or we submit to. Right now, we submit permit packages for road. Yes, they're review. But then probably incomplete list, but a couple of them like streetlight plans get emailed to someone separate. Street plans go to the county forester. Like traffic control plans, they go off to engineering, but they're not. Those are all kind of like separate submittals. There's a way to, and they all need to get approved before we can get the permit from DPS. If there's a way to clean up that process, and that's, I think,
You
part of
mentioned that a couple meetings ago, and after that, I went back and talked, for example, to our traffic folks who were like, why are the MOT plans going somewhere else? And the process probably has been updated since the last time
And I know
that you've submitted
working
one.
on that, but
And so DPS has filled positions, and they're doing, if a traffic control plan is going off of our standards, it's only for kind of a highly complex one that it comes back to our MOT folks within DOT. The templates and just implementing a standard traffic control plan, I think that's all being done by DPS at this point. With regards to, I also said, remember that if people are not using E-plans, we're going to kick their butt and get them on it.
that's gotta get
And that's,
enforced or
yeah.
Clarified.
and so that message has been delivered, and the changes, it's another one of those examples of people doing stuff in between the meetings.
Gary, I want to make, I'm not sure I'm completely clear on, so the challenge for you as a developer is that you're still having to submit different transportation related things to different agencies, or?
Right, so to get a permit for a road, we submit a storm drain paving, the whole road design to DPS, and their group reviews it. But there's, I won't call them ancillary, but there's street trees, for example. Those are supposed to get routed to the county forester so they can review street trees, part of that road package. Mentioned the traffic control plans, which DOT engineering, traffic engineering looks at most cases probably, or maybe we're just working on more complicated plans, but a lot of those don't get routed through the DPS system. You gotta submit something separately to that group and then track it separately. So if we can track everything, which there's agreement to do that, but if we track everything under one submittal, that would be a big help. Because you can't get your permit until you check all those boxes.
So
And
Gary,
one way of doing that would be through E-plans, is that?
Yeah, no, I think we're,
I think you're talking about two different things, Gary. I mean, what Tim Koppel is alluding to, it's during subdivision review function. The concerns and the issues you guys raised a while back, absolutely, with the street lighting, tree, traffic control plan, pavement marking, all those functions are going to be done by DPS. We have been talking to DOT. We have those positions are not being transferred, but we are being trained by DOT. They're subject matter expert. So we are looking by the beginning of the year. So when you submit your package for a right-of-way permit, they all going to come. You're going to be just coming to DPS. You don't have to go to DOT for your pavement marking, street lighting, trees, and stuff like that. So I just want to make sure that part, it's all going to be done. You're right. It used to be, you had to go, and then we could have done our review, but waiting to get the comments back from for the traffic control plans or other issues. All those items are going to be resolved. At this time, we are training. Our training should be done. Our staff should be fully complemented, and then we can do all that all in one-stop shop at DPS when you come for your right-of-way permits.
And I'd like to just add something to that you mentioned, Gary. The street trees have their own separate permit, roadside tree permits, which DPS doesn't make the laws, but DPS is charged with enforcing the laws. And so you have to have a street tree protection plan. And if you're going to be doing something that affects the roadside tree, that is a separate permit that was established by the county council that has to be obtained. And also, there's a separate process with the state on that as well. But it doesn't, that's different than, as Isan said, that is actually different than the traffic mitigation plans that you were just talking about.
Well, and that's the point, because you gotta.
Yeah.
And if they're all coordinated through DPS, that'd be big difference. And
Yeah.
even, most of that's for existing trees, the roadside tree permit, but even on a new street that we're proposing, street trees, the county forester still reviews that with the new road, independent of the other.
And that's where, you know, our interest in that really is ensuring biodiversity, so that we don't get, you know, a tree that gets subject to, you know, Dutch elm disease and wipes out. And that's easy enough to.
You gotta.
We don't have to be we don't have to be part of that process. You know, we can work with DPS and say, all right, within these kind of, that doesn't need a position to transfer.
Yeah, actually, the DPS, when I was the director, we hired 2 arborists on our staff to address these issues. So I'm assuming they're still there, but I don't know.
Well, they're there, and we work directly with DOT, Brent Linklater. So it's all going to be done in one shop. So as part of a new road construction, absolutely, Gary, your street tree, your lighting, they're all going to be reviewed by DPS. And if there is any need that we need to chime in, we will coordinate that with DOT. But all your plans will not go to DOT anymore. They're all going to come to DPS, and you're going to get at one time when everything's reviewed, you're going to get all the plans back.
Okay, so I've got Amanda had a question for Tim, and I know I want to get Robert in here because he's had his hand up for a while. So let's go to Amanda then.
Sure. I think it was just answered, but
Okay.
Tim, maybe say it out loud so everybody hears.
Yeah, no, it's all moving. It can all be done by DPS, and our guy will just focus on maintaining the inventory of the street trees and the right of way, keep them healthy.
But the county forester will still be part of the process.
There's actually, I think there's 2 county foresters technically, depending on what part of the law. One sits in MNC PPC, and then the other is the county arborist. And depending on what.
No.
Isn't there, I thought there,
I mean, I have lots of foresters.
underneath the forest conservation law, there is a reference.
DEP.
I thought there was somebody there's somebody in here who sits here who, for certain parts of forest conservation, is considered, Brett is not considered the county forester for that part of the law. I thought there's a part of the law that someone here is.
Forest conservation is ours,
Yeah.
and we do it here. And we have plenty of arborists and foresters and all that, but we don't have, the county arborist is in DEP.
So my question is, who will be enforcing the roadside tree protection law under this new
DPS
structure?
would enforce.
DPS, well,
Yes.
who at DPS? Is there
Or land development, they will be reviewing those plans.
land develop, so it won't go through a forester anymore, or there is a forester with land development?
Yes,
Sorry,
we
just
have an
trying to understand.
arborist. Yes. As Diane, 2 of them. 2 arborists at DPS.
Okay.
All right, Robert?
So great conversation. I think the discussion about what's going on, I think, is really the post-approval process, if I get that right.
Yeah.
I think when I read the bullet on this, one of the comments that has repeatedly come up during development review through and especially at DRC, is that when a subdivision comes in, you have DOT saying this is my purview to provide comments. And DPS says, we'll wait till site plan to provide our comments. So if they come in together, it's fine, because then you have more of a consolidated and a comprehensive review. But if you get a comment at subdivision and the site plan comes in a year later or 6 months later, you might get different comments at site plan. And so I interpreted this more, on having a more comprehensive response to the comments or to the application at hand when it came through the development process.
Right, because you have 2 different agencies reviewing it. DOT reviews at subdivision, DPS right-of-way reviews at site plan, but it's the same plan. So that's the part that gets interesting.
Well, and then to further complicate things, you have people at park and planning that are reviewing bike paths and sidewalks and things like
Right.
that. And then you've got state highway who's also looking at things. So I think this goes into what, and I hate to open can of worms, but this goes into the lead agency thing about who's reviewing what, so that it's understandable and easily understandable to the person submitting the plans.
Well, aren't they also different levels of details on subdivision versus site plan plans?
There can be, Diane, it depends on, if they're submitted concurrently. But yeah, I mean, there could be a different level of review. I think clearly there tries to be, from the agencies, an attempt to get as much detail, done at the subdivision stage so that it's teed up when you get into site plan.
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that.
But usually, Robert, on the preliminary plans, you get a written document communication from DOT in regard all the traffic issues, the road issues. And once you get to site plan, then yes, DPS is providing the comment. But if there is any confusion between DPS or DOT, we usually resolve it. They have a line of communication with DOT to make sure, yeah, this is what you really want. But I'm still not getting. I mean, if Kate can explain it. So when you coming on subdivision, I get it. You come preliminary, that's everything by DOT. But at subdivision, we usually follow the same guideline, unless something has changed, and usually it does. You go from preliminary, by the time you get to the site plan, there are a lot of stuff changed. At that time, we are looking at the document that was from DOT and we are in discussion. Well, now they want to change that. Do you concur or not? So of course, those things going to happen. But from the standpoint of you're still going to at the DRC, DPS and also DOT is there. You're going to get the comments in regard to the road design.
But that's the point, Hassan. We don't get comments from DOT for its site plan. And presumably they're incorporating what's coming in, what was previously recommended or, by DOT at subdivision. But too often we hear from DOT, site plan will comment on that. Or, we're not commenting necessarily on the site plan, even though I think they do weigh into it. But they don't provide anything in writing at the site plan phase of it. And, again, there's a presumption, and maybe it's the messaging, that DPS kind of takes over the reins when it gets to site plan. But I think there's kind of the fluidity of it as it goes through the process.
Okay. So I think maybe Tim and us need to talk on the side just to make sure that there is no confusion or causing any delays. If you need a response, to get the response so that the process can go forward.
I don't know that it's really causing delays. I think it's really more about who's being represented there at the DRC.
I got you. Yeah.
And like I said, we're typically we don't get involved after that initial plan review.
But you do in the post-approval.
Through DPS contacting us and us getting back involved. And perhaps what we need to work on, maybe Hassan, is a little bit, we're kind of in this handed the baton off and maybe coming up with some improved processes internally to try and streamline that. That's maybe something we can work on together.
Yeah, I mean, because if they're waiting for some kind of a communication either from DOT, from what I'm saying, yeah, we can resolve that absolutely to find out, because like I'm saying, usually at that time, DPS should be providing those comments for DOT. But I also know when I go to DRC meeting, DOT is also represented. Sam is there from our side and Rebecca is there from DOT. So there still should be somebody's providing comments to the applicant at DRC.
So, Steve, Kate, is it the uncertainty about the issue there, or is it timing that it stretches out the time?
I don't think it necessarily stretches out the time. It's just it would be helpful to know exactly for everybody who exactly is doing what, when.
Okay.
And for the most part, I think it's fairly worked out, but for some things, it's a little bit of a nebula. So you have to go to sometimes different groups to ask, questions or get clarification or whatever. So it just would be helpful to have a very clear understanding of who does what.
Okay.
When.
Okay.
I was wondering too, does this cause Because you hear a lot of times from developers, like they like some certainty in what's going to be expected. It doesn't cause an issue. It's, you know, you go through subdivision, you have all your transportation stuff handled there, and then site plan, suddenly there's something new, or do you not really run into that often?
That's a really good question.
Sometimes.
I feel like sometimes that happens. I can't come up with a specific, I'm trying to come up with a specific example.
Yeah.
Let me think about that and I'll.
And to Hassan's point, or also Robert's point, the Rebecca, DOT, and Sam with DPS, they're reviewing plans preliminary plans at DRC. But DOT doesn't review a site plan because they already written their letter as lead agency. Throw that in there.
Right.
But we do get, sometimes we get, and again, there's more detail on site plan, and sometimes there are conflicting comments from DPS, and you gotta go work those out. So that's, if they're minor, it's not a big deal, but if we gotta go meet with DOT and DPS to work out a road comment, I think so.
So we're at 25 minutes permitting. Clearly, we need more time. I guess on this issue, one thing, and I think this is probably true, and Isan, maybe you've done this, but I think it'll be really helpful for what came up last time and what came up this time. If there are specific recommendations that are emerging or that you're contemplating, it would be helpful to prepare them so we can add them to our overall list.
Sure.
It sounds like there may need to be some additional conversation offline.
Okay. So Tim, myself, Kate, and Gary, I guess look forward to have another meeting either this week or early next week to discuss this.
And just for a point of clarification here, this whole conversation very much is an element of lead agency.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Diane. So we've got two more items under permitting. Not sure how to allocate the time here. The next one is evaluate stormwater management. I always think that's something else. Review / infrastructure for more up-to-date infrastructure needs and capacity. I'm not sure I know exactly what that means. I hope someone else does. Pam?
So I think when I was creating the bullets, this one was in reference more to a specific project, and I think it was some of these issues that had occurred in the Kensington area. But because it could be generalized, I wanted to keep it in a bullet, so I mean, I don't know how much time we spend on it, but
I'd make a suggestion.
didn't want to ignore it.
There's a whole separate group that is working on these kind of issues, and that development in Kensington is just one example of many across the county where, as we're seeing that climate change is manifesting itself in this area through more frequent rain and more intense storms. There's a whole, it requires kind of a regional approach to address that. And there's a group that's working on that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm on it for the county executive.
Right, I was just going to ask Tim, could you just write up a sentence or two about that we could then put in response to this?
Yeah.
That's a
So-
county, that's a county group or that's a cross county?
I think, are you guys involved in that too?
I don't think we're involved. I mean, we know.
DEP is on it, because DEP's got the lead on it, DOT's on it, it's part of our climate action plan. And it's very technical in
Maybe
terms of.
we'll have to follow up and see if maybe Khalid's on that. But I mean, we're aware of the issue. I think the relevance to development review is when we go through an application, we need to have a stormwater management approval letter for the subdivision to be able to move it ahead. And so that's why I think it does become a bigger issue, but I know that it's being at least addressed right now.
It's also a development standards issue, which is different than what this group is initially talking about. But as you put in as you're looking at these conversations, one of the challenges, and I'm noting this in particular as it relates to Kensington, where you've got these massive tear down rebuilds and you have stormwater management systems that were designed based on engineering standards for a certain type of a neighborhood. Once you start dramatically increasing impervious areas, you quickly overwhelm the stormwater management system. And I don't know if that's what is being discussed, but you definitely should be looking at that issue as part of it.
So Robert and Tim, this is the area by Knowles Avenue.
Yes.
It's the really the capacity of the existing storm drainage system.
Right.
So yeah, Tim is right, and I think they are the lead on that. As you know, there are a couple of projects came, and there were concerns that with the additional amount of water, as Diane's saying, now it's dumping to an existing system that's already undersized, as it's not able to capture the runoff.
But again, Isan, to my point, this is also a zoning issue because when you're allowed to build basically into the drainage swales and to increase the impervious area by a significant amount, it really makes it a challenge, as we all see with our communities.
I don't view it as necessarily a zoning issue for development review. I mean, this is clearly an application review. I know that what they're talking about is a much broader issue, but
It is a zoning law issue, Robert. It may not be a development review committee issue,
okay.
but it is absolutely a development standard issue.
Sharice wanted to weigh in.
I'm just gonna throw my hat in the ring here with regards to forward thinking. Again, I think this group, even though we're focused on development, review, workflow, process, right? There are other things that the county and the state can take from this work group, and I think that is a sidebar. We talked about just overall infrastructure that the county has and the money that they have available to upgrade and improve these things, not just for projects that are in the queue for development, but projects that are, people are forward thinking about how to recreate and restructure our communities within the county. So I just want to note the importance of keeping that in whatever conversation y'all talk about.
Verita?
Yes, I can provide a small statement about what this flooding work group is doing. They've hired these outside consultants. It's a long-term project. It's very complicated. They're mapping the whole county. And there will be down the road, but it's down the road, there's certain phases go on for 2 years. Recommendations that do these, that deal with zoning type issues, i.e., should we change imperviousness caps? What do we do about the fact that the pipes aren't big enough? So that is something that we can reference.
Yeah, I think it'll be important to have that in the report. So let's move on to the final permitting issue here. Implement and enforce lead agency role in conflicts of post-approval. I'm thinking we move that to the lead agency conversation. So let me just physically do this on my computer. All right. And so, Isan, will be looking to you and your team to just kind of finalize or draft recommendations across all the permitting issues we talked about last time and this time for our group that meets, sometimes it feels like daily, as part of this process. But we're going to move to public involvement. And so, as we noted before, this is where this generated the most number of comments. There were 4 summary comments that are summarized in the top line of this table. And although I don't think it's explicit in the bullets themselves, we also know that this is a critical area to be ensuring that we're focused on racial equity and looking at things with a racial equity lens. So
just an addendum on the flooding study. Yes, planning is participating in that, and you're right, Robert.
Thank you.
All right. So my instinct is to go through these one by one. I don't know if each has a direct link and alignment around racial equity, and if the conversation around the importance of racial equity being incorporated into public involvement does not show up explicitly here, then I want to make sure that we do that as part of this process, part of this discussion. I know Tiffany has joined us. Tiffany, I don't know if you want to
Am I it?
You're not it.
Okay, good. I'll let
Well,
you-
I know that one of the reasons that you came today is that you wanted to make sure a racial equity conversation kind of got teed up in the right kind of ways around public involvement. So
Well, I was.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
But I'm on the spot.
Go
I
ahead.
think.
You want me to?
Well, I mean, I was fascinated to think about what you guys were thinking about when you meant put a racial equity lens into the community engagement process. So when I saw that, that was fascinating. I think what I have to say about this, and I think some other pieces, is really overarching more than it speaks to, I think, the particular
Summary
bullets. I think that, this process is complicated and opaque for folks who work in government, who are informed and who think they know a thing, right? And so for the everyday citizen, person of color or not, this can feel foreign. And so I think that there is a need to make this more clear, right? To have people really be more familiar with the planning process, how it affects their lives, how they interact with their built community, and then how they can engage, right? And then having them understand or believe that the way that they engage actually is going to make a difference, right? I think that we have to be less passive in the way that we inform and then bring in communication. So I think the way we put up notices, and if you know where the notice is, then you can go get it. If you know where the space is, and if you know what the development review process is, you're like, okay, that's me. If you are somebody who does not know and understand this process, then you see that notice, if you see that notice, and you keep it moving, because that's not me. That's not for me. That's not, who are they talking to? So I think that there's a need to do that. And I think that there's a lot of ways we can do that. I mean, if the notice is even in your language, right? So we're in Wheaton, which is one of the most diverse areas in the county, right? So many languages spoken here. But we know that most of the ways that we inform folks are in English, are in a particular place, do not necessarily speak to what many of the residents, quite frankly, and business owners may know and or understand. So I think that there's a bigger lens, racial or not, needed when we are thinking about how we do community engagement. And so I think we ought to be open to revamping the whole thing. I was talking to a group earlier, I guess it was last week, about the planning academies in both Baltimore and Howard County. And those planning academies really are intended to reach out to communities to talk about how zoning is happening in their local jurisdiction, what the planning review processes are, but also to interact with folks, not just a one-way education for communities. It really is for the planning department to, one, like I said, find out how people interact with their lived environment. Perhaps there are accessibility issues, language and otherwise, that we don't know of, that we are not intending, but that just happen to be that way, right? And so that's a good way for us to inform, to get information, and to build trust, right? To say that we're just not here, for however long that public hearing or that process goes on, we would like to actually know, like I said, how you interact, what you need from us, how we can build this in a way that you interact with this in a way that is fruitful. And then, I think it's good for us to talk to people about what our intentions are and why this development we think is what's best or not best for community. And then if it's not, we can get input and actually take that input and use that input in a way that makes it, like I said, helpful for the community using or living in that space. So mine is really overarching and not, like I said, particular to those bullets. I don't know if it speaks to racial equity as much as it speaks to transparency and the way that we interact with the public.
I think very helpful comments. Sharice?
So I would like to take a stab at incorporating the East County presentation with the community engagement, having reviewed the comments in the public involvement section. They are pretty much just saying the same thing, like, we're here too late, we're not engaged, we don't feel like when we make comments that they're relevant to the developers don't care about our community. Who is the liaison that cares about our community, that's engaging with these developers who are changing the quality of life, whether they think it's good for us or not good for us? So if the group is open to that, I think a lot of what I incorporated, utilizing East County as a representation of an underrepresented segment of the county, would probably address many of these things, not just for East County, but for all sections of the county in the same regard.
I'm open to that for sure. And I also have some additional comments based on observations and feedback that I've gotten from particularly my community, downtown Bethesda, where development's going gangbusters, and people really have a lot of comments about these particular, the summary comments that you've put in here. So I'm fine.
That first, I think
Having
you should
start and then segueing into that for sure.
I would defer. If there's comments on here specific, then I would say lead with that. I just wanted to share. I just wanted to offer that up since we were kind of like.
It's a good idea. And in this agenda, they come back to back, right? So it could be just a continuing conversation, and you adding some of the kind of details from what you collected from East
I think
County.
that's a good way to do it because it might be a little bit more time efficient.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
I'll tag on to.
Well, I was actually saying, going through here, the same order. So why don't we go with the order, and then straight after that, we go straight into East County. And if there are East County related issues in the 4, bring them up in these 4 summary comments here. So Amanda, do you want to start on the first, or Tom?
Go ahead.
Tom, then Amanda?
No, Amanda.
Okay.
Well, first, I'm really curious to hear more about these planning academies because I hadn't heard of that before. So I'd be interested to learn more about those in the other locations. But I just wanted to focus on the first 2 really, which was there's this sort of like chicken and egg scenario that gets set up because we have these pre-application community meetings that are held, that the developers hold, and community members attend and feel like they provide comments. And there's still this ongoing question / skepticism as to how those comments actually get translated or transmitted to planning staff in the way that the person making the comment actually intended, since planning staff is not attending those meetings. And then that sort of flows into the next issue, which is comments being included in staff reports where, sometimes people do get in on that sort of the first step when there's the community meeting, and other times they hear about it after the community meeting when people start talking about it. And so the next step to get in is when that staff report comes out, because that puts everything in one place. It's very readable, whereas a lot of the plans are not. You look on the DAIC and there's so many documents, but the staff report, really puts it all in one place where people can understand. But then there's this issue of, well, wait a minute, there was no comments because people couldn't even comment on something they didn't have. They didn't have that staff report. So I just want to say planning staff has done a better job recently. I've noticed it of including comments on the agenda as attachments. And I think that's really helpful, and definitely keep doing that, and telling the planning board there were community comments that are not necessarily reflected in the staff report, but here's the attachment for that. That's really helpful. But then it gets back to this feeling that people have of they provided comments maybe initially, but didn't know that they had to provide them again, and sometimes again, and again. So how do you capture those comments originally and carry them through accurately for that process.
Just to clarify, Amanda, so the comments that are now getting incorporated in these planning board meetings as an attachment, is that comments from the initial pre-application meeting, or you're not even sure?
It's not, no, I mean, the attachments that appear are specifically written testimony that people
I see.
provide to planning staff. It's not necessarily the more informal comments that
came out in
happened
the
during the
pre-app.
pre-submittal meetings. It's my sense.
So the concern here is kind of the disconnect of those initial comments and whether planning staff ever kind of hears them,
It's a
integrates
question.
them, and then there's also a second issue, which is around community just not understanding, like what happens with there and why do they have to come back, and maybe more than once they have to come back. Just clarity.
Right, there's a question of what happens to those initial comments. And I think it's not necessarily consistent. I think in some cases they are passed along and in others maybe aren't accurate. So is there a way to improve it? Like, I guess that's the core question. Is there a way to improve it so that there's not this question or skepticism out there as to whether comments were,
Well, I think to start off first, and I'll let Gary and Kate weigh in on this as well, but when the pre-application or when the community meeting is held, people sign in. So people that come there, they sign in, and if they have specific comments, they're either written or they're verbalized. And it sounds to me like maybe the verbalized piece of it is maybe the part that is a little bit of a disconnect. And how that's recorded, I think part of that is within their statement of justification that's submitted afterwards, or it's in a written format. But in some cases, it may not be. I mean, if it's verbal and they make a change to the plan or not, then I think maybe that's the piece that requires a little bit more digging into. But we do get comments for every case, and we understand who participated in one of these community meetings if they've signed in. And in many cases, staff will have conversations with those people throughout the review process. So I'll stop, and maybe both of you can weigh in as to comments that come up during a presentation and how that's relayed to the planning department. Because and before you answer, planning does not participate in these pre-community meetings. It's not our meeting. This was something we initiated as a result of Clarksburg because we felt like what we heard was they want to hear from the community wants to hear from the developer. They don't want to hear from planning at this stage. And in most cases, planning hasn't seen these plans. So for us to show up and participate, it looks like we're advocating one way or another. And it really is not intended to be our meeting. But and I know that was a comment that came up a couple times during some of the correspondence, but and we can have a further discussion about that. But I think maybe just to respond to kind of that other piece of discussion.
Start.
I'm going to go back to, because I know it was one of the comments, is maybe just a story that gets told, and whether the applicant and developer agrees to do something different, or they're told to do something different by state, by pick on Tim, DOT, whoever. But I'm going to use that we're not working on it, but I got to sit through the planning board hearing on it because we had an item after. The Glenmont Forest apartment building that's on George Avenue by the Metro. That came up, I think, in one of the discussions because the neighborhood behind that is concerned about traffic and they don't want any access off their neighborhood. I know, and I don't know the story, but I'm going to use that as an example, but they ended up with limited or no access off the George Avenue. And part of that because the Metro's right across the street, because there's a tunnel underneath the road, and also partly because it's state highway and state highway, their regulations. But I think that's a good example of what was presented, and again, I don't know the details, but what was presented at the pre-submittal meeting, what went to DRC, and then what went to the planning board probably changed multiple times. And I know access and traffic with the neighbors was a big deal. And that's why I think that was one of those that took an hour or 2 hours in front of the planning board to talk about it. And then the planning board ended up basically approving the staff recommendation, but also weighted with the state highway regulations. And I know that was one of the comments that came up last month or one of the listening sessions, that the couple of those neighbors came up because they're still not happy with what got approved. But I don't know what that story is, and I don't know if there's a way to tell the story, because I know we do plans, we'll say this is what the developer or the applicant wants to do. When we get to DRC, okay, we can't do that because of planning, we can't do that with DOT, we can't do that in highway. So we address all those comments, and the plans that were different. So, and that's, I think, part of your point, is that things change, and whether or not some of those comments were from the original meeting. And I know we've had a number of projects that from, oh, it's too dense, or we don't want that, we don't want apartments here, we want single families, or whatever the comment is. But a lot of that's either mandated by the master plan, so you have to disagree with, there's some basic disagreements that people are assuming a certain thing. But I guess my point is, how do you come back and track all that? Because it does, what's shown initially, the one when you go DRC, and then before you even get to planning board, the plan keeps evolving. And I don't know if that helps to say, okay, we showed an access point, DRC, state highway told us we couldn't do that, so we moved it around to the neighborhood side. And, if that helps, I don't know if people are going to agree with the solution or the outcome, but I think that's part of your point, is how to track what was commented on, what goes to get approved, whether it's agreed or disagreed or changed or whatever.
That's a good example, actually, because we did hear a lot of feedback during public testimony about that particular project. And those neighbors are clearly feeling like something went wrong.
It got approved and they don't agree with what got approved.
And not everyone's going to agree with, right? I mean, this is very complicated. There's so much that has to go into these projects. But people want to feel like, at least, whether they're agreed with or not, at least their comments were addressed, I guess, and passed along, so that it could be, so that planning staff can look at them.
So I'm looking at the specific comment, and it says here, people's comments should be collected and reflected in the report to the planning board. So if I'm understanding correctly, right now, only written testimony gets attached in the planning board meeting, but whatever comments you all may get, any developer may get, there's not a rule or an expectation about what they're going to do with that or how that's going to.
No, there is. So they have to submit like an affidavit of they held this. These were the comments that they heard at the meeting. So they do have to submit that as part of the plan. That gets to the reviewer, and the reviewer sees it and then, works with it. But if you want comments to get in front of the board, that needs to be submitted as part of the planning process. So
I think it might just be part of it is education, telling people when they go to the pre-submittal hearing, your comments may or may not actually make it in front of the board. If you want to be in front of the board, you are going to have to appear at the hearing or provide written testimony for the board. We are just the applicant. We are listening to you. We will say we had this meeting, but community, public, you're going to have to make sure your comments get put in front of the board.
Real quick, so, and to add on to your comment, Steve, so any written correspondence that comes in, we do attach to the staff report so that people know what has come in, and we try to respond as to how it has been addressed. It may not be completely resolved because sometimes the comments, it's too dense. And, you can say, okay, well, here's the master plan, this is what it called out for, here's the zoning, here's what the vision was and how it fits in, with that vision. So you may not completely agree with the comment, but we do address it in the staff report, and that gets presented to the board in that fashion. If we get a phone call, and sometimes our phone calls are anonymous, sometimes they're not, we do try to capture that as well. And I know, most staff are pretty good about that, at least capturing that. I got a phone call. We had a conversation with a resident about X, Y, and Z, and here's how we have responded to that. But I also think, to Amanda's point here, there are two opportunities for an applicant to resubmit. And those resubmittals will change things. So comment may have come in early on and the applicant has responded to that. And then something else has come up and there's another submittal that might have changed it. So you really do have to be able to track it. And I think that's where the agencies are the most helpful in trying to navigate and guide the community members to at least help them and assist them with kind of what's changed or what hasn't changed. And this is what's going to move ahead.
And I also think making sure community public has enough time between when a staff report is posted and when it goes to the board to be able to actually read it, to talk about it if it's, something that's particularly impactful, and provide comments, because sometimes that's a really tight turnaround.
So it's a 10 days.
It's 10 days.
It's a 10-day legal requirement.
But for some of these big projects that, you might be wanting to have, neighborhood communication on.
But there are ways, I hear you on that, Amanda, for sure. But at the same time, we're trying to keep things moving.
Sure.
So there are ways to get involved earlier. You can sit in and listen to the DRC meeting, and that might give you a really good sense of what's going on. And that's, something that we're hoping with the new idea of, hey, you want to sign up for this generalized list, we'll send out basically an email with the link to the DRC or whatever, and you guys can look and see, is there something that I want to attend?
I think that's going to be huge. That's great.
I think that'll help. Everything helps a little. It doesn't solve the bigger problem. But it is such a balance to give everybody enough time to look at things, to make sure everybody is aware, but also to keep the project moving, because, if it's not a 10-day notice period and it's longer, now we're not streamlining anymore. And that is a balance.
I do think the noticing will help a lot.
And that case that Gary's talking about came in for site plan yesterday. And we actually had a member from the community sit in on the DRC and talk to us afterwards. So we had good conversations with them to kind of continue the dialogue from where it started.
One thing for sure I'm hearing is the educational component of just helping citizens and residents understanding better about what to expect all along the way and when they can be involved and what happens with what they submit. I guess what I'm still not clear on is in terms of comments, whether written or verbal, that come in pre-application meetings, does that all get passed on to planning? Or does
There's a note-taking requirement. So when you actually submit your package to Department of Planning, as part of that package, you have to your point, sign an affidavit that you had the meeting, but also submit the notes from the meeting. And we try to be as transparent as possible with those notes. Sometimes it's, there's a lot of things that are discussed in these meetings, so sometimes you're better than others. But at the end of the day, at those meetings, I always give people my contact information. And when they call me, if it's an issue that's an agency issue, I'm always like, well, here is your reviewer. Please contact them and talk to them as well. And in general, we try to be as transparent, at least we do, try to be as transparent as possible, because change is hard for people, and these are the changes we're talking about are pretty significant changes. And there are certain things that the residents can impact and there are certain things that they can't. And so I'm going to try to be as upfront and as honest as possible. And if they, would like to talk to an agency that has a comment or that can help them better than I can, then I would just pass them along to the person that can help them.
That's a really important point. I'm going to get to both of you, but the whole clarity around what you can influence and what you can, right? Sometimes that's hard news to swallow for people, but at least they're clear up front, right?
I try to be as honest as possible with people, and we're going to agree to we're going to disagree, but that's just an unfortunate part of the process. But at least we're being honest about it up front.
Absolutely. Sharice, then Meredith.
I was just going to speak to quality of life. I think what Gary was saying, because some of these comments are like, the community wants to be more involved right from the beginning, but being involved right from the beginning can change from the beginning to where the point of beginning really begins in the process. So I think what most citizens are concerned with is how whatever development is happening is going to change the course of their quality of life. So if the developers speak to that story, more so than exactly the structure that's going up or how pretty it's going to be, or, then that is an opportunity that's outside of the site plan and all of those things, because those are more engineering logistics that have to be worked out more so than like the one lady in here talking about the lane change at Old Georgetown Road. I mean, I don't know when that beginning started that this road needed to be changed, but what I'm seeing in these comments is that they just want to be aware that this is going to take place and understand how it's going to impact them based on what the intention of the development is. So that I think can help. And if we're talking about the process and the speed of things, maybe the hearings have a component that speaks to that part more so than the more, intricate engineering of the development.
When you say quality of life, give me 3 or 4 things. Yeah, we're not even just kind of nouns or adjectives that describe that in your community. When you all think about quality of life.
Okay, yeah, schools.
Say it again.
Yeah, she said schools, traffic, access to whatever, like if I used to take my kids to the park this way and now I can't get to the park because there's a big development, I have to walk through. Safety, that's a big quality of life thing. You put a bunch of bike shares in the right of ways and people don't feel safe riding bikes in the neighborhood, that's counterproductive. I think also that developers, if you want them to create in a community in a way that is constructive to the culture of that community, they need to understand that community, right? So if the community feels like they haven't done that part, then there's a lack of appreciation. There is a lack of sustainability that can happen on the backside of that development. We've seen a lot of projects go up with great intentions and then they fail because the community doesn't support what's there. Same thing, you could look at leases, a department store moves in thinking, oh, it's gonna be great for this community because, whatever they are looking at, maybe some demographics, maybe they didn't do their homework, I don't know. Or maybe the quality of the community has changed from one instance to other. But I think what we're looking at is, yes, the speed of things, but also the sustainability of things. So,
Thanks. Meredith?
Well, Sharice brings up some very good points. There's sort of the 2 aspects of it. How easy is it to participate? And then, what brings you in, quality of life, which I think that is the reason. But how easy is it to participate? It's not easy at all. Not easy at all. The question is, what kinds of tools or information can be given to the public outside of the particular project? Because, you don't want to spend a long time educating about one project. You need to educate people about all the different processes that happen in planning, not one particular project. Because I went through this as a citizen. I stopped working, I was home with the kids, and I started attending these things. But I learned a few things. One, the developer is an advocate. They are not just providing, they're honest. Not, everybody's honest, and they're providing accurate information. But they're, understandably, you have a right to develop property. They're advocating for the development of property the way they're. So people need to understand the roles of the parties. Planning is the place where you can go and, talk about all your concerns and what you do, you don't understand. And I think having as much a role planning, educating people about how the whole process works. And in terms of quality of life, run into a problem with adequate public facilities. And this is the developer's not responsible for, how overcrowded the schools are and all this. They're responsible for their one project, but where there's situations that people are already very unhappy, and then there's a new development coming in that could possibly exacerbate the project, they're not responsible for that. And I think, look at the road policy and those policies to help people in terms of quality of life. But the first thing is the education. And also to be
Sorry, first thing is to,
education and to be welcoming. I mean, I could tell you a story. Times I advocated as president, and it was not welcoming. I mean, planning was great, but because I didn't, but I didn't always know what I was doing. I made all kinds of mistakes, and this is something I had wrong assumptions about how things worked, and all these people are experts on it. They're fine. Yeah. So it has to be welcoming, and maybe there should be an ombudsman, or maybe we'll talk about it with the People's Council. But I don't know if that's the place, but there needs to be somewhere where people can, just get information early on. And
so Tom and then
Robert.
Okay.
Please. Just to try to deal with some of the bullets and based on a lot of the comments, but I think, I did talk to Robert and some developers, in regard to some of these issues, and with Christina about whether the developer should do this pre-application. And I think I understand better why it actually serves a particular purpose to have developer do it. I think one of the issues, so I get why that is, and that's the next bullet there, or one of the bullets. But anyway, but I think that the thing that's missing is from all these the community comments that we got, Amanda kind of and Therese kind of talked about some of those, is the people want to be sure about their comments being carried on. And I think some developers are going to be very efficient and organized and get not just the written comments to you all, but also the other comments. Some others may not be quite as efficient or effective in that. And I think that for the constituents, it's just going to be, if there's, I'm not sure how you deal with that difference in effectiveness, but I think for constituents, just to have something that's really formal that they understand at those developer meetings that, we're recording your comments, we're going to report them to planning, and then for you guys, just to make sure that all of your reviewers are recording all those comments and what was done about them. And I think one of the things that I understand better right now about the developer process is, you have the pre-application hearing, and then for some developers, you're going back to people and making changes based on what the comments were, because it's going to work better and have some reaction from the community. You want to avoid a problem. So the plan changes. I do think having this, as Amanda said, some second opportunity and letting people know up front, like at that pre-application hearing, here are the times you can weigh in on this process. Today, and if it's written, that's good. Or after, you can weigh in with planning, or the reviewers, and then you can weigh in again after the planning, after the review document's done, and then if there's another opportunity to weigh in, just so people know up front and get that notice, like not just at the pre-application hearing, but then also for you guys on your own. It's, the website, there's a ton of information, and just if there's a way to somehow make it stand out, when are those points? And it might be helpful to address a lot of these issues about the comments that we heard, and also on the parking lot that changed over time because of SHA. I think just when for some of these comments, I think as you said, Kate, it's like this can't be changed because there's this state law that says X, and those kinds of things. But if that's acknowledged in the development, and I know a lot of it is, but just to make sure that all of those are responded to, I think it's going to address a lot of those kinds.
No, I was just going to speak to the educational piece of it, and I think, planning does a really good job, and I know permitting has been doing some outreach as well in terms of educating people on their process, and we've participated in some of those training sessions. Again, I think we do a really good job of trying to promote what we can do and how we can assist through a process. It is a little daunting, and I'll agree that from a homeowner's perspective, to be able to navigate that. So we try to be as interactive and proactive as possible. At the very beginning, I can tell you, because I participate in many of them, we go out to community meetings on a very regular basis to educate the community. Some of that is because they're contacting us. And we go to a variety of groups and a variety of meetings regarding the plan. Sometimes it's just getting on their monthly calendar to update them on things coming in. But from an educational and an outreach and engagement perspective, I do think the agencies as a whole, but specifically planning, we do a really good job of trying to promote what's going on for awareness and for engagement within that process. And if there's specific recommendations that we can do better, we try to entertain just about everything to see what we can do to make it better, because we want to make sure people follow the process, that they follow what's going on. And if they can engage early rather than at the tail end, it definitely is easier for everyone. And I think more efficient and productive.
Sorry, Tiffany reminded me of this because I used to work in Baltimore City, and they would have, it's Baltimore City, very different from Montgomery County, but most of the city is under neighborhood groups and HOAs. So we did like a sort of rotation of going to each, just to make sure you hit them all. But I do want to flag that one thing that's tough though is, you want to schedule these meetings to educate people, right, but the people we're trying to educate are the people who aren't interested and don't care and don't know about it, because you don't want to send planning staff out to a meeting where 2 people show up, even though that's the community who doesn't know anything about it. So just flagging that piece of, you can have all the meetings you want and you want people to be there, but it's going to be the people we're trying to reach are the people least likely to attend in the first place. Right. So my thought was going to be if you could record some of them, so then when a project pops up, if the person wants to watch it, they could just go online and be like, here's a quick video on the development review process. How you would do that quickly, I don't know, given how many of these meetings we've had, but just a quick. Yeah.
I will say, when you have an application, Howard County, they do have a YouTube process.
Yeah, so then people can sort of on demand go watch it.
Like that too.
I just want to add to that thought was, and this is a challenge for Amanda and Cherise and public in general. We have these outreach meetings, there's a sign-up sheet, and inevitably half the people don't sign up. We ask for their emails, we do follow-ups. Most of the people, I get too many emails, or I don't want to be bothered. Okay, that's fair. But then, ironically, those are the people that come out and say they weren't contacted. So there's a challenge there, and again, it's just come back to communication, getting involved, and obviously people that don't care aren't going to come out anyways, but that's a challenge on the other side too.
And then I'm going to make it.
It was just a quick observation. I actually mentioned it to Christina. So one thing could be, we've been talking, I don't know if you heard this, Tiffany, earlier discussion about having people self-sign up to get email blasts about all the DRC meetings. So if you self-sign up for plannings, like tell me what's going on, you're going to get on a regular basis what the DRC meetings schedule is, so that if you want to attend virtually and hear the people who are reviewing the application have a conversation about it, you can do that. But one thing might be, while I know they don't want to give you their email to get information from you guys, but maybe there's a requirement that you provide that email sign up for them to get the DRC information. It's a slightly different, it's still like emails they may not want to receive, but if they're being told you have an opportunity to provide your email to the planning department, so that when this application gets reviewed by DEP, DOT, DPS, planning staff, developer, you can be part of that. And you'll get an email on a regular basis telling you when these things are coming forward. Because you at that point of that pre-app meeting won't know when that date is. You don't yet. You haven't actually submitted your application. So it's just another way, like it's not an email from you guys necessarily, that you are telling them they can give an email to get regular information from planning on every application.
I think all of that is true. I think that we should consider doing our work differently. Maybe those meetings are not the way to do it because they're not coming to me. Maybe we should go with people, right? Maybe what people do every day, how they do every day, that's where we should be. Not we should have a meeting and they should come to us. So that's I just think we have to invert our thinking about this if we want to engage people who are not engaged. And I'm not just talking about planning, but in general.
I think that's a good point. And I think that's what we do for master planning, and that's, we're going out to community festivals and things like that. That's where you're able to do that. For development review, you're not able to do that. You have a very strict timeline. Sometimes I have had developers who have attended the fall festival and things like that. That's great, but that's part of their own, process. But to actually the things that they have to hit in order to submit, they have to have a meeting so that it is available to whoever wants to attend. We have to have DRC, and that's a specific thing that's here. So since it's development review is different than community engagement, and that's where it gets a little interesting. And that's why I think it's great. I love the idea of thinking of more ways we can, we talked about redoing the signs so that maybe they're more approachable to the public, and having this list and things like that. Those things are, I think, will hopefully help. And I'm very interested in any other ideas for how we can do better about noticing within the time constraints that we have for development review, but it's a very legal notice requirement. Community engagement that we do for planning and for all of our great projects, that is where we have the ability to really think outside the box and go out to the festivals and do things like that. But I mean, we have thousands of plans coming through. They have to all meet the timeline, and they have to all check the box that they did all these public things. And we can't be okay, well, you have to go to a festival first, or you have to, whatever it is. It has to be something that could fit within that realm for development.
So I've got Delegate Foley and then Meredith, and I'm just going to alert us, we are now at the hour of a 10-minute break.
All right.
Go ahead, Delegate
I
Foley.
just want to put an exclamation point on what Tiffany said. She and I were exchanging glances because I think, it's really hard because this is a very complicated process, as you all know, and there are a lot of legal requirements, and there's a lot coming through the pipeline. And the staff and bureaucracy we have is only so big, so much. But I do think that there needs to be less of a one-size-fits-all and more kind of looking at projects from the get-go and saying, okay, is this an underserved community? Do we have to do something different here? Is this a community where a majority or a great proportion of them are not English speakers? Do we need to do something different here? Now, I know that's difficult, but I think, if we're going to build trust, we have, and that's really what we're talking about, right, is building trust in the process and in the projects that are approved. If we're going to do that, we really have to, I think, reach out in a different way. Because I think sometimes, and I come at this totally from somebody who's not involved in this process at all, but does live in the community, is, there are conversations, and this is not news to you all, there are conversations that are going on in the community that you don't hear, that you don't know about. And those can come back and really, I mean, that's when you get surprised, right? That's what you don't want. You don't want a big group of people coming and saying, oh, we oppose this, or we have problems with this.
So you need to try to plug into those conversations, those what's going on in that community as early as possible. I don't have a really great solution except to say, I think sometimes we may need to take some projects and say, this deserves some sort of special outreach, depending on where it is and who the people in the community are. And I know that's difficult, but, it might pay off in some cases, so.
Meredith and then Sharice.
I'd like to echo the delegate's comments. That's exactly correct. And, Christina, I respect what you said about master plans, but there was also a huge brouhaha about Bride Montgomery, which was the master plan of all master plans, the general plan, and lack of meaningful outreach in the BIPOC communities. And the consultant report, when the county council hired a consultant, they said outreach hadn't been adequate and that people had not understood, and they had all kinds of examples of ways to build trust and actually find out what people think that they recommended to be done. Talking about the trust issue, it's not reasonable to rely on Joe Smith is going to serve for 1 year in the middle of his job and, taking his kids around and all, but he's going to automatically know to send in the new information. There has to be a method by which you can do that, because trust starts with identifying leaders in the community you can talk to who know how to bring people, into the process. And that's very important, but it's done step by step. The other thing is, and I'm probably out of date on this, but in the staff report, in my opinion, should attach as an exhibit the report from the developer as to the meeting and what so that people can see, here's, we did get it, the board can read it because it's attached as an exhibit. And also any public comment, so that the board was always copied on all public comment. You do get it, but some of it comes in very late, of course. But to the extent you had some, it should be attached to it. That way, you get much more transparent. So I guess
But if I understand that is a practice that is now happening, right?
That's been a practice for quite some time, even probably when you were on the board. I think it's been a practice because we have a section called community outreach, and we attach correspondence that comes in. We attach any, and if it's not a correspondence that came in, written or electronically, then it's one, that we'll call out as we receive the phone call. And this is how it was either addressed or resolved. So we do that already, and we have been doing that for quite some time. In response to, reaching out to different groups, I think we would need to understand what they're talking, what exactly are you talking about in terms of a suggestion or recommendation?
Having a staff person, having a system by which you review, the civic association's notices. Like if you haven't gotten a change in 5 years or whatever, 3 years, then staff member goes, calls and tries to identify or emails that person to update that.
Well, in some cases we do that. We have longstanding meetings with different community groups, countywide. But it is the responsibility of the HOA or civic to let us know that leadership changed, and that they need to update their system. I don't know how, because there are so many civics and so many HOAs that we do have a system to where they should be reaching out to us. We'll change it automatically if we can, and we know who it is. But to reach out to someone that stepped down 5 years ago, I don't know that hasn't been our practice. And then I also want to address, we're not talking about Thrive today. And so I know that she likes to bring that up, but I feel like that's an approved document that we have. The council has approved it, and we are using that as the basis for our staff reports, for the work that we do, for our master plans. And we bring that up on each, kind of almost in each application that goes to the board. This is how it's compliant. So,
But Maya was just talking about outreach and the problems that drive that. Do you attach as an affidavit or the affidavit from the developer to the staff report?
No.
that's part of the application.
The board doesn't see what happened, anything about the pre-application
No.
meeting.
So
I think that's an issue because there needs to be some way to show the public that somehow, it wasn't just going through the motions and then.
It's all posted on DAIC.
Right.
Like when you submit as part of your application, like it's public information. So it's just not part of the staff report.
I think what happens when you sometimes see the staff report's written and then comments come in. So the comments aren't actually in the staff report, but they're on the attachments. That's how I see it when I look at the agenda.
It's both ways.
So if it comes in before the staff report's posted, it'll be incorporated in the thing, and then afterwards it gets attached by the.
And a lot come in after because that's when people have had the opportunity to actually read the project all in one place.
But that's also where like the agency letters are and
Yes,
stuff.
they're all in those attachments.
All right, so I'm going to call a break, and when we come back, what I'd like to do, so I think there's a few comments that I'd like to make at the opening, and then I want to turn it to Sharice, whatever comments you had, but also to talk us through your document, because I think a lot of the stuff that we've talked about here are very relevant for Sharice and her colleagues in East County, just so we make sure that if there's kind of a breakthrough that we can make here around recommendations, I want to make sure that we can get there. So let's take a 10-minute break. Now let's make it a real 10-minute break. So around 8 minutes, I'm going to be calling people back. Hopefully we'll be back in our seats in 10 minutes. I've got 11:11, so 11:21, we're going to start again.
I'm setting a timer.
So there's just a couple of things before I hand it off to Sharice that I'd just like to offer here. So first is just a reminder that in the first page of the letter of intent, the first bullet on the first page says, we're wanting the best and most efficient process while neither minimizing public participation, racial equity and social justice, nor compromising on safety, transportation, etc. So I think this is important, especially in today's conversations, just to remember. A second thing I just wanted to share really quickly, when I first had a conversation with Delegate Lopez about possibly submitting a proposal for this, it's like, I want to get myself up to speed on development review before I even decide to write anything. And one of the things that I found was this handbook from Maritas, California, and it's a fairly lengthy document, but it's written for residents, right? So it's done in a pretty user-friendly way. I mean, you still have to have some sophistication, I think, but something like this for people who are willing to dig into it, and I think most residents probably are not, can get people grounded, right? And I think, was it Meredith or someone else that was saying, there's also a good video, which, people are more likely to spend 3 or 4 minutes on a video online than, spending 25 minutes reading through something like this. But just kind of offer it as an idea here down the road, if that's something to consider. A third thing I'll say is
we do have something on the website.
You do? That's like that?
How to get involved, the step-by-step process and where all different things are. I mean, I don't have the pretty pictures they have on there, so I could always update that.
Yeah, so again, I haven't dug around to see where everything is, but I think one of the issues is, and it kind of speaks to it right here, it's like the typical resident doesn't know where to find stuff, right? So what are the easiest ways to help them find stuff? A third thing I would just say, so, I was actually involved in the first planning academy for Howard County Department of Planning and Zoning. Yeah, and so it's like, well, we should do a planning academy. Well, what does that really mean? And how will we do it? In 5 weeks or 6 weeks? And so we did it with 25 or 30 people from around the county, and it went very well. It obviously wasn't all on development review, it was on more broadly planning. And they've since done it, even interrupted by COVID, 10 or 11 times since then. And even that 10 or 11 times only touches 250 people who really get it, right? And there's still the thousands that don't. So, I think part of the challenge is, like, what are the different ways that people can access at a level that they're ready for? Someone's ready for 5 training sessions over 6 weeks or whatever. Cool. Someone's willing to read a long handbook. Cool. Someone's ready to watch a 4-minute video. Cool. But it's just kind of thinking kind of beyond what's typically done. So, and I know Prince George's County, my county, is getting ready to roll out a Citizens Planning Academy. So anyway, that's just kind of a background. The other thing I'll just say before I turn it over to Sharice is, so my team was involved in the Thrive consultant report back in June, July, August, September. Was it last year? It was. Time flies. And so, obviously it was positioned to comment on the public input, public participation in Thrive, but we also tried to write certain sections of it, how it could be relevant to whatever county agency or whatever county planning process. And I realized development review is kind of its own beast, but I do think there are some really important elements in there about, especially, and this is stuff that I see all the time in my work. There's a profound lack of trust in so many communities, not exclusively BIPOC, but most frequently BIPOC, where they've just had so many things done to them over the decades or longer, right? That it takes a very long time to build trust, to be willing to participate in a process. But it does start with simple things like Tiffany was saying, of you show up where they are, right? And I will also say, as someone who's a member of an HOA, but doesn't always agree with my HOA leadership, that That's a limited way of getting into a community, right? Because, for example, my HOA came out against a townhouse community adjacent to my neighborhood. It's like, I don't know, I still don't really understand the opposition, but they came out with the official position of the board. It's like, well, no one asked me about that, right? So I think we have to be careful about what does it mean to really be participating with HOAs and civic associations, and do they really represent the neighborhoods where they, presumably come from? So I say all that to tee up Charisse, who has, I think, some really interesting perspectives around some of these things in East County. So I can probably figure out how to make this full screen, but I'm not sure.
There are hard copies, so
Yep.
if people here in the room want to follow along with the hard copy or just reference it, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, there's.
I have a different way of going through presentations, especially when you have the document in front of you. So I'm going to actually lead with the recommendation that I like to propose, seeing an outcome from this work group, and then work backwards with the importance of that. But before I give the recommendation, I'm going to just share a personal testimony. So I'm here as the Up County community representative, and when the notification went out that they were looking for community representatives, my community, as I've known it all the years that I've lived in my area, was not represented. It was Up County, Down County, and Mid County. Okay. So if I wasn't informed, if my husband didn't say, I think they expressly left East County out, like on purpose. But then I went and I looked at the map for planning and I said, okay, I see why the letter is written the way it's written, because East County is not identified on the map. But for all intensive purposes, as a citizen who has given testimony to council, given testimony to the board, very engaged in all things community, in Montgomery County, never knew that East County was not represented in planning, because even though I'm a realtor, I'm not a developer, and I haven't had to be in that world with it. And in all the conversation we had this morning about public involvement, I'm, again, sharing someone who's educated and informed. I did not feel included or like I was supposed to be a part of this because my section of the county was not represented. Okay, so that's a real life story of somebody that's in the room with you. So my recommendation would be to include East County on the planning map and ensure the inclusivity of the work that's needed and being proposed for that sector's development. I did talk to Robert about it and shared it. I look at this as being an administrative edit. I don't look at this as recommending that the workload or any of that needs to shift. I wish Patrick was here because that's his, section or whatever. But what I'm sharing is very informative for everybody in this group with regards to some of the community forward-facing resources that are available that homeowners that may be looking at development for their own private property would likely go to and look at and see the correlation here to what I'm going to introduce as the regional service areas. So in this document, I have a picture of the planning map, which you can see is Up County, Mid County, Down County. And then on the side of it, I know Robert said we're not talking about Thrive, but I did use it also just kind of as a, a foundation, because out of the key recommendations in Thrive, one of them is prioritize racial equity and economic competitiveness throughout the county and especially in East County. Okay, so you're identifying it as East County in the county's new planning guide, and it's not representative on the map. So anyone who's living in that area, they, again, if you're trying to educate and inform them about why this is important to them, don't see it expressly represented. On the next page, I also included the service region areas map. And I want to just read really quickly the mission statement of, they're called the regional directors. And Jeru Bande is our regional director in East County. I did ask him, I said, I don't know if all the regional directors function like you do. He was very engaged when I was doing things with the for the county school systems. When we needed to have public engagement meetings on a large scale, I worked very closely with Giroux to coordinate those meetings in different places. So to Tiffany's point, kind of going where the people are in the time that we need them to share their comments with us before the county budgets are approved. And we want to have school improvements and we need operating budget things. All these things that do come back to development in some regard, but he was very integral in that. And all of the regional service directors, like this is a part of their job to engage the community in this way. So I just want to read the mission statement here because you will need bifocals to see how small this print is. But it says the mission of the regional services centers is to represent the county in their respective regions by providing effective, timely liaison between the county and its residents and businesses, and by working with individuals, community groups, regional citizens, advisory boards, and other public agencies to provide information, identify and assess regional problems and issues, and recommend and/or implement solutions. So by nature of what that agency, not an agency, I don't think they should be on this league thing or whatever, but by nature of their work, they already are kind of in a space to support the developers, to support planning, and to support the county in doing this public involvement, and public engagement work that we're talking about. And I think would be very open to taking into account the timelines and seeing how that can, be factored in. On the next page, I just shared an example of what the up-county services area, how it's represented in county resources. It doesn't, up-county here on this map does not include what is technically East County. So there's a disconnect there. And then you can see this is a request for development proposals that came through East County Regional Services Centers. So, I mean, basically the whole document is just giving you information to kind of see the other maps that are available that are being utilized outside of planning that do represent East County, that do represent certain council districts. So when you come into an issue of a community that's opposed to development, who do they go to? They go to their county council members and complain. They go, they go to the county executive office, straight to the top. They're not generally coming to planning first unless they know that maybe I can be, right? So I think taking into account the opportunity to show, based on the maps that people know, their council districts. If you look at the map to the left, East County is represented in District 5 and part of District 7. If you look at the map in the middle, that's the Board of Education's redistricting that was done in 2021. This was proposed, it was a big deal. And finally, the one at the bottom is what was used for elections last year to the bottom right. So I would propose that this mapping could help planning to determine what an easy administrative edit could look like to ensure that East County is physically represented on the map based on maps that already exist and define East County. The other thing is a resource, this GIS on the next page. I put it out as a little homework assignment because I thought it would be fun if you guys tried it out, but I don't know if anybody did the link. But this is like all the different map resources. And there's one tool on there that's called About My Address. So if you click to the next one or you look at the next page, this is a sample of what About My Address form looks like. And you put your address, so the white block kind of represents me playing around with it. You put your address in, and this is how the information comes up. The first thing that's on the block that tells me about my address is my regional service center. It's directing me directly to Eastern Montgomery, where this contact information goes to that regional service center. So if I want additional information, and generally that's what we do. When people in the community need guidance on anything, whether it's healthcare, whether it's schools, whether it's, planning stuff, we don't typically send them to planning. We're like, go to your regional, because they have people that are working there that are supposed to support and be able to guide and direct. So we talk about underutilized resources in the county. A lot of times it's because the agencies are not connecting in the way that they need to really support the county. There was a recommendation here in public involvement. I think here it says, consider requiring pre-application community meetings being organized by the planning department. And what I'm suggesting is that your regional services representative could probably help to support some of that work in the very early stages, because they're aware of the plans for development. They're aware of who's proposing the plans. A lot of times they can either support or not support those people who are coming in with plans, because they understand the needs of their community, because they are always engaged in that way, supporting the needs of their community. And they will create the opportunities to ensure, whether it's through churches, whether it's through, the supermarket, they figure out and they know how to get to their community. They know the languages, so when notifications go out, they make sure that they're accessible in all those different languages. I also just wanted to point out on that about my address. So it says Regional Services Center, and then it has the section for planning, right? And under the section for planning, it doesn't specify the sector of the map. It specifies your master plan area, okay? And which is fine, but I'm just saying, Sandy Spring, Ashton, for all intents and purposes, when you think about how a citizen recognizes their area, this doesn't have nothing to do with development, but it has everything to do with ensuring your community has consistent information and that they're educated about, where am I represented? Like, how do I even fit into this, right? So in my area, I have 20905 zip code, right? My master plan area is Sandy Spring, Ashton. My postal office is Colesville, across Randolph Road. There was a big thing about, can this be Colesville or can this be Ashton? The school board Board of Education, is my kid going to go to Sherwood? Is my kid going to go to Blake? Like, all those are big, and they impact development. They impact how a developer can come in and feel like they're going to get a return on their investment based on what they decide to invest in the community. So as a county, if we want to start in a very small place, being consistent with how things are represented so that people can plan effectively, and that's all people, the developers, the planning department, the WSSC, whoever it is. I just think that this is a small step that we could take. I just put on here the 2050 outcomes of Thrive, just in case you haven't read that, because I think this speaks to everything that we've talked about with regards to public involvement. And I think that, even though this forum is intended to support speeding up or improving the review process, I do believe that some of these underlying issues also help to make the process not as smooth as it possibly can be from a community involvement perspective, and also from the developer's point of view. So again, I don't like to just read everything that's on the paper. I know it's very small, but I did take time to put this together for you all. And I did outline on this last page and also on the first page the excerpts from the letter of intent from Delegate Lopez to reinforce why I think this recommendation is relevant to the work of this group. And, all of these bullets really, Montgomery County, you started out with it, Steve, you read it. And then the second one, Montgomery County has the assets to be the best in the region for economic development, and improving the development review process will help to ensure better economic development for all. for all has to be represented for them to feel like they're for all. That's it.
I want to thank you for that presentation. That's extremely well put, presented. Robert.
And first, thank you, Sharice. This was great. I know it's a follow-up to a discussion that we had, and it's been one that you brought up a number of times. And we do appreciate it. And we understand that East County historically has not been represented like it should. And I think we've been planning, and I think county and agencies as well have made strides to try and recognize that. And not only through master plans, but we're seeing new development coming into, the White Oak area, even Burtonsville. And I think it's a great move, as we have the discussion. I know it's easy to put a line on a map that says East County. I think there needs to be a lot of discussion as to where East County really is. And you started with this because I can ask someone in Tacoma and they're going to say they're in East County because we hear that quite often. I hear people in Olney say they're East County or they're North County. So what I would like to maybe recommend, because and equate this to something that was done by the county and many different agencies, is when the discussion about kind of the White Flint area, which now is called the Pike District, was a major rebranding effort that involved the Regional Services Center, MCEDC, planning, the chamber within those areas, and they decided kind of as a larger group what the boundaries would be and how to rebrand them. So it wasn't South Rockville, it wasn't East Potomac, it wasn't North Bethesda. It became its own district, and it really was more of a rebranding and a marketing issue so that we could start identifying kind of that area. I think the same would have to be for East County. I think there needs to be more of a defined boundary, whether it's the ones that you brought up or you just match it up with the East County Regional Services Center. I just think that there needs to be more discussion about where those boundaries would be. I don't know that we have an objection to it. I think it's just I think there's more involvement that needs to happen with it. That this work group, I don't think really should be deciding on what the boundary of East County is. And lastly, I know that Sharice and I have had a discussion about the staffing resources that not only we have, but the county has about, redefining, and I use that term in a very broad way, redefining East County. Right now we have 3 geographic areas that are represented: down county, mid county, up county. And there were reasons why they were chosen that geographic area. They started out with areas 1, 2, and 3, then they changed the colors, then they changed to different names, and then they became what we have today. Right now, we don't have the resources for a new team. But if that were to be the case, then I think that's a bigger discussion to have. And again, I don't think we don't have any opposition to rebranding East County, but I think there's more involvement that needs to happen. And I think this is a good start to the discussion.
Sharice, then Amanda. Yeah.
My response to that would be that East County doesn't need to be rebranded because it's already defined. It's just not defined on your map. It's defined on Region Services map. It's defined on Board of Education map. It's defined on all the other maps, which is why I put them in here. So what it looks like is that the planning map is outdated compared to the other maps because of the reasons you said that, the areas were defined the way they were for whatever, the reasons were. But as we're moving forward today in ensuring that we're meeting the goals of Thrive, where it expressly defines East County, I think most people who were a part of the conversations that led to these maps being defined as they are, including the directors who are in charge of these regions, would not say that it's not defined, it's just not represented on the planning. I just wanted to share that.
First of all, thank you, Sharice. This was an outstanding presentation, and it makes so much sense in so many ways. And you've gotten the wheels turning, and me thinking, looking at these maps and putting them all in one place like this is very effective. It really makes you start to think, like, why are these boundaries the way they are? And I'm looking more closely at it and even wondering why the Beltway defines Up County now. I'm like, I don't think anybody who lives right there would say they live in Up County, that's not what they associate with. And so I really appreciate you starting this discussion. And I do hope this goes somewhere, because I think you're making some just very valid points, and it's very thought-provoking.
Christina, then Meredith.
Meredith was first. Go ahead, Meredith.
Oh, sorry. It's hard for me to see
Yeah.
folks down my end of the table.
I know.
Lead forward.
Well, yeah, excellent. Eye-opening in a lot of ways. But I think, I understand what Robert's saying, but our recommendations are general recommendations. Specific on some of the internal things that we have a lot of control over. But I think that we should, this group should recommend that these counties separate plan area boundaries and be defined consistent with other counties' definitions of. So you synchronize all the, as you were saying, synchronize. So planning is consistent. And it's a great point that it has been identified in section 5 again, but this is a positive statement. Positive statement. Yet this has been one of the focuses when we're talking about racial equity and social justice and what we want to happen. The growth map was changed in order to emphasize the needs and development of the East County. This is one of the big, really be one of the changes. So I think we just should make systems in that. But we're not going to sit here and do it. Right. No, but we recommend that it be done.
I was just gonna say that, and I completely understand what you're talking about, Sharice, because if you got that, you'd be like, I don't live in Up County. Why am I, this doesn't apply to me. I think that's probably one of the only times that Up County, Down County, Mid County was actually used in a public facing way. It's just kind of an internal, like, I don't even think of ourselves in that way. I still go by the old area 1, 2, and 3 in my head. I mean, we've had random names. It's just the way that we've kind of divvied things up. When we go out to the public, we're usually talking to them about their planning area, right? So like for you, it would be like Sandy Spring, right? So then you probably would recognize that a little bit more. And I wonder if one of the easier fixes, just to begin with, is to make sure that the way that we define things on our website and things that people, from the public are looking at to see where they fall, that it's much clearer that this includes these planning areas, these master plans, these communities, just to be a little bit clearer on that end, because we do hear all the time different people, like you were just saying, Amanda, like, well, I'm not in Up County, I'm right by the Beltway. Or, folks thinking like, well, why am I in this area and whatnot? They tend to be just more like internal words we're using, but since they are sometimes public facing, I think it's a good point. And I think the easiest first step is just to make sure that we're really making it clear, where am I being represented? Who do I need to talk to? Who's got my interest in mind, in planning. And so I think we should look at our website to make sure that that's really clear.
So how does it work internally?
It's how the work is divvied up.
It's not yet.
So,
Yeah.
so what I'm saying is, what is the usefulness if Up County includes Potomac And only, what is the usefulness internally to, in your, you know what I'm saying, for your group?
Can I jump in? I don't know if you can see my hand, Steve.
Oh, I can't.
Okay, so I've had my hand up. First of all, I think this was a great example and a great presentation. And for some of us who have been around forever and ever and ever, I think some of this terminology is vestiges of things that used to be and that time has changed. And I think it's worth noting, while it won't be changed today or maybe in this work group, it is a parking lot item to be handled outside, because the down county areas were considered to be the areas where density was to be focused. East County and Up County, there were areas, and some of this goes all the way back to zoning decisions that were championed by Marilyn Praisner in terms of how to restrict development. Roger Lewis had done he's got some great presentations on planning mistakes, planning decisions, which at the time seemed well made, but in the long run ended up leading to divided communities. And it's just very, very interesting. And I do think it's worth having a look at it. East County includes areas that are rural cluster, but, Up County, it's just, and I think it also, to Amanda's point, some of this, and Sharice, to your point, which again, this was a really powerful punch on the presentation on it, is that when you're looking at this, how do you know what's going to affect you in a project? Because you really need to understand a little bit more specifically about what the nuances of your community are, and whether it's a planning area, whether it is a planning number area, whatever it is, it should be made more contemporary. These are old terms from old approaches to planning that really had a lot to do with decisions relating to where density would be.
Tim,
Oops.
Tim, Tom, and then Robert.
So I heard two things. One, I heard what you were saying about the workload, and perhaps that opens up a whole other future discussion about, are you adequately resourced? But to me, you could have even the same resources and just update the map as a starting point, so that people know this development is in this region, and I should keep my antenna up. I think that's one thing. The second thing that I thought was interesting, and I don't know how it is incorporated today, is the voice of the regional service center director and what they're supposed to be doing to advocate on behalf of the community that they're representing. I thought that was a really important part of what you said. I didn't want that to get lost, because I don't know how regional service center directors are incorporated into the planning process today.
I can answer that, but Thomas next.
Okay, go ahead, Robert. Actually, that was a question that I was going to ask.
It's also written right here, very microscopically, the additional functions speak really clearly to it.
I was just going to say, I
I know.
think a short term, Christina's suggestion about like short term to change, like identifying like smaller region like Sandy Spring and et cetera is a good idea. And then, I mean, changing your areas that could involve staffing additions or changes, and certainly that's going to be something that county council is going to have to be involved in. But I think, certainly this is, it is a great presentation, by the way, Sharice. This is really great. And I know all five, and I actually meet with these five directors on a regular basis, and they are all very, very engaged with their communities. And it's a useful outreach to maybe build on a bit, in the short term, while you think about how to change the boundaries, as Sharice was saying, so the community can identify themselves in it. But there is a good recognition, it seems, in a lot of areas for the regional service areas where Giroux is very, very active, but so are the other four, very involved with their community, and that might be a way to help get word out on some of these things where people feel less connected. And then, just where medium term, thinking about how to change the boundary so that the community sort of sees themselves in it.
I was just going to respond that, our teams are extremely active with the regional services directors, and Drew is probably the biggest, and I use this term, cheerleader for the county, for that part of the county, and we work with them on a very regular basis. When, as a preface, and this kind of goes to what Diane was saying, when these were created years ago, these boundary areas, the reason that they were created was Down County was simple. It had 3 of the 4 central business districts. It had Friendship Heights, Silver Spring, and Bethesda, and the boundary for that area was very easy with the Beltway. Mid-County was called the Emerging Corridors area. So it was kind of outside the Beltway. It included parts of Wheaton. It included all the way up to Gaithersburg as you go up the Pike. And so it kind of was this amorphous little area going up beyond Down County. And then Up County was just really the rest of the county. I can't say it was that simple, but Mid-County was more definitive, I think, in terms of where the boundaries were set. And the reason that it was important was, at the time, it was workload, it was staffing, some of it was zoning. So a lot of the Up County includes the Ag Reserve, it includes our rustic roads, it includes areas that weren't as pertinent to the Mid-County area, that we felt like the Up County could deal with a little bit more. And again, I think what's coming out of this is we've said we can definitely reevaluate that. I just don't know that drawing a line on a map today is the best answer without having more information, more interaction with the different communities here and the different regional services directors. And, thank goodness, I think at least for Down County, Mid-County, those, you had regional services centers like Wheaton, had a good presence, I think, in this area for representing portions of Mid-County. Mid-County and Up County are split on the east side. So it's kind of at the dividing line is really Tech Road. And so you had, and again, a lot of that had to do with development coming in at the time, or not coming in at the time, and how we disperse some of our workload. But, the regional services director for Down County and Mid-County are split as you look at Bethesda and White Flint. So it didn't line up as seamlessly as I think we'd like. And then Up County Regional Services Center was really, it was the Ag Reserve, it was Germantown and Damascus, and I think points east. So again, I think a big part of the discussion here is how do we recognize East County in a much more productive way.
And I would just add, if this has implications that go well beyond planning, right? I mean, it's just greater
Exactly.
coordination in general across many agencies about East County and kind of where it fits and sits, right? Amanda.
I think you've opened up a fantastic rabbit hole here. This is good. So just to tag on to the Regional Services Center issue. So they are a fantastic resource. I've had the same experience, but also there's some limited bandwidth there because it's usually just 1 or 2 people, and they are covering often vast amount of geography and population. So, so the BCC regional is Bethesda, Chevy Chase, Friendship Heights, Glen Echo, North Bethesda, Potomac, Rockville, Twin Brook. That's a huge swath to cover. And oftentimes the regional services centers are having to step in and fill a gap where they're filling a gap of a role of local government where local government doesn't exist, right? So they're having to fill that in with limited bandwidth and resources. So I think it's important to look at that map too, and what's needed. We have grown tremendously since these have been established. To have 1.1 million people and 500 square miles, and have the map look like this. It's worth having a look at, both planning and regional services, because regional, right? That word, like, what does that mean to people in the community? How do they associate themselves with their regional services center. So thank you for bringing that up too.
Just say as my last comment about it is that, as Christina, you made this come to mind when you said, based on my address, one could assume that my master plan area is Sandy Spring, right? But that's not completely true from a citizen's perspective. So I think our role as community representatives is to help you all from an external point of view understand the dynamics of how what you do internally impacts us, and how what you choose to define based on your internal operations implicitly excludes the people in the community that you're trying to bring to the table. So Fairland Briggs Cheney Master Plan is something that I'm very involved in, because everything that goes on in that corridor affects me. When a developer is building housing in that area, whether or not my neighbors can afford to stay in the community or take advantage of that housing is important to me. Whether East County, East Montgomery County, what am I trying to say? Montgomery College, campus is coming there. The programming that goes into that university, it affects me, right, as a citizen. So I just want to, put a cap on it, that I understand to Robert's point, there's more people that, need to be a part of the conversation. So that's not my intent, is to push a decision today. But I just want, from my role as a community person, help you understand. And I have the developers, right? Kate will say, when they're looking at what's White Oak Science Gateway, perfect example. Developer, huge community engagement, everybody was involved, but it didn't make sense financially for that developer to do what he was intending to do, ultimately for whatever limitations to that county. So what they're bringing to the table, this is a perfect example of what you said earlier. Oh, the community was engaged in the beginning and then it all went away, right? And now it's like, oh, there's a new developer. So I just want to, leave you all with that comment.
Just to perhaps close this part of the conversation, I mean, I think, because I see this in Prince George's County too. I mean, part of this is about, from what I'm hearing, is county residents don't necessarily feel visible or seen, right, and overlooked. And that's not just planning, but it has lots of implications for planning, right? And the examples you just gave, lots of implications for development review. If such and such happens a mile from my house, am I going to be able to stay here? We're dealing with this all along the Purple Line corridor, right? So, and that the impacts are not just a half a mile or a mile in a lot of cases. So, another reason why involving the public is so important. So, we are at 12:04. We have 26 minutes. I don't know if, so we've heard your recommendation, and at the same time, I think we acknowledge that that kind of change is not going to happen in this time frame. So we need to, I think, figure out what's the right language for the recommendation. And I think there were some other things that were actually mentioned here as potential recommendations that I think our smaller group can take a look at. But is there any specific recommendation that perhaps has not been articulated here around public involvement that we just want to make sure stays in the mix here for consideration? Have I missed any of kind of the language, Meredith?
Tiffany and I were talking.
We can't hear that.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. Tiffany and I were speaking at the break, and we said that we would work on some recommendations to send in, soon.
To send to this group.
To this group.
Yeah, to this group.
Related to the conversation about public involvement.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. If you could get that to us this week, as you know, we're in the process of trying to compile all the stuff that's coming out of today.
I hear you.
Or by Monday. Yeah.
How about yesterday?
Yesterday would be even better. Great. So I'm kind of at a decision point here. I'm reticent to start a new category. I do want to,
Minutes.
what's that? We had 25 minutes, and I at least wanted to share briefly around defining consensus. So maybe I can do that in the final 5 minutes and you guys can chew on it in between meetings, if that sounds okay. I'll read it off at the end of the meeting. I'll make sure that everyone has a copy of it. You can chew on it. You can send feedback to me by email on any tweaks or changes you would make. And if that's okay, then we can go into lead agency for 20 minutes. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have a second on that? I'm kidding. All right. So lead agency. And we actually added something that came from public involvement. So I'm just going to make sure it ends up on the top of this list. So there's 6 items here. I don't know if there's a particular order in which we should tackle them. Why doesn't everybody take a look? That's awfully small up there. And is there something, I won't say easy because nothing in this group is easy, but is there something that makes sense to kind of tackle first in this conversation? I just start at the top of the list. Shrugs of shoulders.
Well,
I'll
the
start.
top of the list, I think, is easy because we already talked about intake, so I don't think we need to talk about it again here.
Okay.
Oh.
Good point.
Yeah, wait. I would like to add something. I didn't always know whether we'd actually issue or what the recommendations are. We can go back and do that, particularly for intake. The only thing that I understood that was told to us is that planning is in the process of redoing their checklist for intake. But we had a lot of comment from developers, mainly from developers, I guess, that the intake process takes too long. And, you know, it was an education for me. I had no idea that turn in something in 10 days, but then whoops, it get returned, and then you have to turn in something else in 10 days. And that it can run as long as, 7 weeks, 4 months, something of the record. And the proposals that are in, I think where Shirley proposed this, that just take the 10 days, that approach would be that the applicant only has to, they have to have everything on the list, on the checklist, everything that's required. But it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, ready to go as if are talking about the details of the project. And I think, looking at that because
So one of the things,
too long.
one of the things I would suggest is, so we spent a lot of time on intake. What I would say is if you go back to the notes, see specific parts of the conversation that we had that rise to the level of a recommendation, let's add it to that list that we're going to be compiling and sharing on the 27th.
Right,
But I'm concerned about going back to intake again because we spent a lot of time.
Say that we've had a lot of minutes on it. There are good notes on it, and I know that the conversation came up about putting a time frame on it, and I think that the group landed on not, other than the way that it's currently drafted, because they are in the process of working on the checklist and in addition, working on the substantiveness of that review. And I think that we will continue to not get moving forward if we go back to intent.
Well,
So the two,
let me just put in my
recommend-
objection then. The county executive objects because we haven't ever seen,
It's not about
excuse me, either the actual, I did see the actual checklist online, but we've never actually talked about it. And we haven't seen your proposal for revision. So, and given that this was another area of which there was great concern, I just take exception to that. And so we may not.
So, but what I guess what I'm asking here, we spent a lot of time on it. If there's a specific recommendation or enhancement to a recommendation, I would ask that whoever wants to be involved in that, go back and look at it and propose something. But we spent probably 45 minutes on it at a previous meeting, and then we moved on. We're already digging into time allotted for lead agency, and I want to make sure we can get at some of the other issues. So I understand that you still have concerns. I'm wondering if you can draft some kind of recommendation that can address that. That's not going to take up the time of the whole group.
Right, sure.
Okay.
But I don't want the recommendation to rehash everything we've already discussed, and that's the thing. We had 2 recommendations coming out of the last one. It was just saying that we are creating a simplified applicant checklist. If you don't want to include that as a work group recommendation, that's fine. I'll remove it. The other one was that the planning department will provide a training on intake for applicants. We'll record it. We'll put it on our own website. Those were the 2 recommendations that came out of this work group. I don't think we should go back and rehash everything. I think that you had your opportunity then to say you were here. It's not like you weren't. So I think that we need to move on. We can't keep rehashing everything.
Yeah, so that's what I'm suggesting. If there's either a change to that language or there's an additional recommendation, bring it to our small planning team. We can add it to the list, and the whole group will take a look at it on the 27th.
My only concern with where this is going, because we've now had that Meredith and Tiffany are going to bring recommendations forward. Now you're telling Meredith she can bring her own recommendation forward. Basically, the draft list we already have is that we go back over all the notes in the current discussion and come out with what the group has talked about and landed on as the recommendation as we've had these discussions. So it feels odd to me to now say that any individual working group member can just put forward a recommendation.
Well, I'm not sure that there's been agreement on all these recommendations, and I think that if Meredith has something that she wants to say that she feels hasn't been addressed, I think that's appropriate, and she.
But it has. We've had this conversation, and that's the point.
There's been no vote on anything, though, and I'm sorry. I'm going to invoke the rules of this group about the respectful engagement. There has been no vote on anything.
So to try to move us forward, so I understand your concern, Pam. What I'm going to ask for at least the 2 instances where people are going to send something, I'm going to ask you to look back at the notes of the conversation, both from Kimberly and the rawer notes that I took around that were reflective of the conversation we had and how to kind of boil that down to a recommendation, as opposed to things that we haven't talked about.
I think, and the idea was that we were going to bring those recommendations back to the whole group when we make
Correct.
decisions. And so there could be
Correct.
an opportunity to
On the 27th.
amendments and
Yep.
changes, adjustments, or vote up, and ultimately a vote up or down.
But to be clear, the recommendations that we put together were the ones that we had already solidified on. They weren't, it's not like I'm just pulling recommendations from thin air. This was what the work group had already decided. So
There was
When you
no
say
decision.
decided,
There was
what do you
no
mean by that?
decision.
Like, when you say decided, like, were there votes or were there not votes? Like, when you say decided, what does that mean?
There were not votes on, and I
Okay.
think there was a vote on one thing that was around state law.
Okay. That's,
so everybody was in agreement, nodding their heads, and we moved on. And so
but that's
what.
not, is that what we're saying is a
Do you
decision?
want to talk about consensus?
Yeah, do you want to talk
Yeah,
about
I think that that's where we are, Amanda. Thank you so much, because I think that's where we are.
So I guess the first thing I would say is that this has been an uncertain part of this group all along, right? And I think part of that lands on me. There was no definition of consensus in the letter of intent, so it was kind of open to interpretation. And for the longest time, it took us a long time just to get to talking about specific testimony, right? So this is just the 3rd meeting, and as you can see, we're still not even halfway through the list. So it's been a messy process. So right now, in terms of the things that our smaller group has collected, is we've gone, Christina and others, myself included, have taken as good a notes as we can and tried to understand where it seemed like there was agreement, basic agreement in the room, right? Not consensus, no votes taken, et cetera, but just trying to, so that when we go to the 27th, which we've pointed at as the day that we're going to be looking at recommendations, yes or no, right? We might have a list of 23 of them. And it could be that only 12 of them kind of reach consensus. But we're trying to make sure that what we capture here seems to be capturing where the groups seem to land on certain things to the best of our discernment, right? Imperfect as it might be. So that's my caveat, right? I can share very briefly here what we've talked about briefly around consensus. Let me blow this up a little bit. So, you know, there's lots of definitions of consensus out there. The purest is everyone has to agree, which in this context seems virtually impossible, right? There's another version which is everyone agrees, and if they don't agree, they're willing to go along with it as long as their disagreement is noted. That's also can be a high bar, right? So here's what we've said. We will seek to get full agreement on every recommendation compiled as is possible. We know that there will likely be one or a small number who may not agree with specific recommendations, and we will note the organizations which did not agree in the final report. For any recommendation to make the report as agreed upon, we propose that it has reached a threshold of a supermajority, which we're defining as 67% support. After each vote, if there will not be continued discussion on a recommendation. So if it hits 64%, we're not going to sit around the table trying to convince one more person to hit 69%, right? And then each member of the working group will have a vote on each recommendation as long as they attend the September 27 meeting, either in person or virtually. So this is our own unique definition of consensus to try and get fairly significant support for a fairly significant number of recommendations that can move forward either to the state or to various parts of the county. So we can open it up for discussion now. We may run out of time. And if you have further feedback, I'm happy to receive it by email tomorrow and Friday. So how does that sit with you? You all may have been involved with different consensus or shared agreement processes in the past. I've tried to draw on the different ways that I've done it and tried to kind of customize it. I think we all have around just the nature of this group. Sharice.
Works for this group, and also pair it with noting who was not in agreement, just so that it's on record, and maybe if there's that gets noted, so whoever's reviewing this has an understanding that most of the people agreed, but these people didn't, and this is why. Then they can kind of formulate their own.
Okay, helpful comment, thank you. Meredith?
I don't want to belabor this, but not agree on how we are stopped from bringing out any other kind of recommendation, because supposedly not agreement on that. Don't agree on that. And I understand, for example, first of all, this is in the discussion. It says improve intake. So, you know, I was waiting until we got to this bullet. Secondly, the recommendation that I suggested is it's in the record. It's in the statements and letters that were sent by the public. I didn't just come up with this idea on my own. So it's something everybody else has read and knows about. So a lot of things on the fly, and great job. I mean, I've done a very hard process, but he did that.
So here's what
these are imperfect documents.
Yeah,
so,
they absolutely are. Here's what I would say, Meredith. What I don't want to have happen is I start getting emails from 22 different members with 44 different ideas about what should be a recommendation. So I'm willing, in the two examples noted, because it's grounded in the conversations that we've already had. And happy to receive that, take a look at it. We can add it internally. We can vet it on the 27th. But it's going to be hard enough to come to agreement on just a fairly small set of things that I don't want a laundry list of people's kind of different issues on different perspectives. I really want it to be grounded as much as possible on the conversations we've had over the last 3 months. Delegate and then Tim.
Thanks. So just to be clear for us, Leslie, myself. So is this going to go like in this order, more or less? So like you're going to seek full agreement on recommendations. If there's agreement, you're just going to move on. I mean, some things are simple, right? Not many, but some. You're just going to move on. You're not going to take a vote on everything. You're going to take a vote on the ones where there's disagreement. Am I correct on that?
I mean, again, we haven't talked exactly how we're going to do it, and it's a little more challenging virtually.
Right.
But I imagine we will take some kind of vote really quickly just to make sure that.
On every recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
again,
Okay.
I'm hoping it's not 36 recommendations. I'm hoping it's 20 or so, and that we can get through it.
Right.
But yeah, I think we have to, given this, I think we have to take a vote. And the ones that it's kind of a no-brainer, hopefully they'll go really quickly.
Quick, yeah.
Tim.
So my concern is, being the nerdy engineer, the math, 67%, and we've got 21, 22 people. So a third would be 7. Got 4 people who none of us have ever seen. What do we mean by 67% support? I mean,
So
maybe that's hidden there.
Isn't that the bottom? Oh, it might be hidden in that last line.
I don't know.
Hide that thing.
Okay, there we go.
Oh,
So the vote is happening on the 27th. They have to show up either in person or virtually. And I think the current list that we have of working group members, the 3 non-WSSC utilities are more advisory and resources to the group rather than voting members. So I think the total number is 18 or 19. But yes, so the number would be 6. But I would say in general, most of those 18 have shown up on a regular basis. Not every single one. But again, I don't know how we discern, oh, well, you were only at 2 meetings, so you don't vote. I'm not sure we want to get to that, but I'm hoping we can have kind of a open process, and the people who show up ready to vote are the people who've kind of really been around the table for much of this process so far.
Steve, I'm sorry, but is there any constituency? By that, I mean any agency or any county office or anyone who, of the 4, has not been represented at all? Because if there are people who didn't show up, like, for example, there are 2 people from the county executive's office, but if there are 2 people that didn't show up and therefore they represent the same group, and one of them has shown up and one hasn't, are there any of the 4?
Well, I would point out, we're going to make recommendations about state highway administration. I think that's probably the one thing we can all agree on. But nobody from state highway has ever been here.
Well, yeah, and also.
And the delegation.
Will, that's for us, right? I assume, right?
Yes. But yeah, I mean, part of this is a messy process. So good that we're having this conversation now. Just wanting to make sure so that was a really good point. So yes, in this case, ideally we have the 18 most active members in the room on the 27th, and therefore 67%, if we're rounding, right, would be 6 people, would be 12 people voting yes, right?
Some recommendations are going to just have to be a recommendation for future discussion or future study into some of these issues. Are those going to be like official recommendations, or are we only looking at sort of like concrete legislative, whether it's state or county legislative recommendations, and then put the recommendations for hopefully future short-term addressing of issues?
I think it's mixed.
So what I would say is that everything that's not related to the state, which is main charge of the group and what needed to be done with a lot more detail to provide to the delegate. I mean, that framework this group is supposed to be looking at. And then what happened was the process of getting public testimony, holding listening sessions, getting correspondence. We've uncovered a lot of other things that people think could be a benefit to the development review process. I see those as high level kind of quote recommendations with language that would be evaluate, consider, discuss, further investigate, things that are an action, but not one that the group is saying today, this is what has to happen.
I would like to see there be a little bit more maybe detail or commitment to those, because I've just in the past, I've seen it happen over and over again with reports. That kind of language just ends up sort of getting lost down the line unless there's like a very sort of concrete action. And maybe some of it, that's okay to have it be just sort of a general recommendation.
Maybe,
But maybe there's some
recommendation by
things that
recommendation
need,
basis.
that
when we
need a
look at
little
them.
bit more like.
Some of it, I think, will be easy. It'll be easier to propose some kind of action. Others, I think, will remain broad.
I guess not to stray off the consensus piece, but to me, all of this is just boiling down to like, what's the report? So I had envisioned we would vote on each of those recommendations because that's the only way whoever ends up drafting this thing is going to know what to even put into it.
Okay.
So that's why I was thinking, yes, we would vote on each one. And then it's just going to come down to our like editing of the report, how much detail is going to be provided.
I agree with that.
And we would record the items that in the report that didn't get 67%. So, whoever reads the report can see what else was on the table, and maybe there's something else to do with that. Diane?
Sorry, I agree. I agree that it would be voting by line item, and then you know what the items you have consensus on and the items that you do not.
Okay. Tim, next. Or you can be timid.
Yeah, I guess I kind of have a logistics question. We're talking about talking about the recommendations and voting, and it feels like we're moving towards
Consensus, right?
On the 27th, how do we actually foresee that going and working given our timing? I mean, that's another 3-hour meeting like this one. If there are 20 recommendations in that, that's 9 minutes a recommendation with no breaks.
We're going to be voting out in the hallway as we grab.
Yeah, and like anything that foments
Yeah,
kind of discussion, which.
I mean, it could be, so one proposal is we could reinstitute the 4-hour meeting, would give us a little bit more time. I know, people probably don't want to do that.
Presumably what we vote on the 27th will only be things we've discussed. So if on September 20th, that's the cutoff for public testimony. Whatever we don't get to, we'll note in the report.
The first was, yeah, so the public
No,
testimony.
for deliberation of this group.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The 20th will be the last time that we talk about the public testimony, and we'll put in the report, here are the categories that like this work group just couldn't get to because of time. So I think probably all of the 27th will just be voting on each one. But again, it should only be recommendations that have been discussed. So there shouldn't be, we're not going to do 25 minutes on each recommendation, hopefully. Because again, that's why I like once we vote, we're not discussing it anymore.
One caveat. So what I would say is we can send out a preliminary list based on today's meeting and previous meetings before the 20th, so you can see it. And then we can add to that list on the 20th, and we see how that list grows, so that you have a heads up on what we see as things that seem to have been solidified that will come up to a vote on the 27th, but you can already begin thinking about it. So delegate, and then Karen.
Yeah, just really quickly. So I've been communicating with Delegate Lopez.
Okay.
So a couple of things. One, to think about, not discuss today, but to think about, and she asked me to put a pin in, is whether this work group should continue. So that's something to think about, whether this work group should continue. The second thing that I do want to bring up is Delegate Lopez, or I in her stead, will not be voting, right? So I just want to make that clear. Okay, that's it.
That's it. All right.
About the voting, why you don't send the day before everything that we need to vote? Then everyone vote, and only we discuss that day, whatever things
we didn't agree, everyone agreed.
You're saying vote ahead of time once you have the list?
So we don't go that day for everything. I don't know, maybe we save 10 minutes, I don't know, but we will save some minutes that for things that we don't need to discuss and all of us agree. And see that they are not, everyone is in the same page that we vote again in person.
So I like the idea a lot, and part of the challenge is, having dealt with many groups, is not everyone will vote by the 27th online, so it will be kind of an incomplete vote. The other thing is, and I'm hoping we can circumvent at least some of this. So if we send out kind of the initial list before the 20th, there may be certain things that we've written in a way that it's like, well, I forget what does this really mean? So if we can clarify things where there's confusion, so we're not having the conversation about, well, I'm not sure what we mean by examine, or I'm not sure, I don't remember. So that's the kind of thing that usually comes up when you're putting stuff on. It's like, wait a minute, is that really what we said? Is that really the right way to phrase it? And so I'd rather get that input and feedback ahead of time if you feel like it's been misinterpreted or what have you. Karam, and then Sharice.
We don't vote by the 27th. It's like this. I ask because.
Vote early, vote often, right?
Yeah, because we will discuss every point.
No, I understand.
We will not end ever. Like, I think that will save time. And it's like, nobody, like, I think sometimes when you do it by yourself, nobody's looking at you. You can vote it.
No one's side-eyeing you. You better vote yes on this one.
What do you think is the best way to vote? And then that day we only discuss what you don't agree.
Yeah, I agree. Can we give people time limits on the day of the vote? So we're not.
You like the time limits I had today?
Everybody, like, if people want to discuss something, I understand that there might be clarification or questions or some dialogue that needs to happen, but to have a 15-minute or 20-minute dialogue on every item, we're never going to get through each recommendation. And I know it's not fair necessarily ideal, but everybody should get a minute or 2 minutes or something to help, to move this along. Otherwise, we're never.
Yeah, we won't get through 20, whatever. Sharice?
I just wanted to piggyback and say, if you could do it in a Google thing, and the expectation of the group is that you're going to review this before the 27th, because we know we don't have a lot of time to go through it, and those that don't vote in advance maybe don't participate in the vote, and maybe it's a prerequisite that'll force people to pay attention and do it. Even if you get some consensus through that, it will help to move the conversation along.
Or we could have voting and have a meeting, make it 4 hours, and have, like, the first part of the meeting is online voting. Like, we all sit down in this room and we have online.
I'm just gonna say, don't do online voting.
No.
People want to hear the discussion. So, I mean, I know you've discussed it a lot, but if you do online voting, what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot behind the scenes going on. And if you have the vote here while you're on the, it's your all's decision, but if you have the vote here while you're on Zoom and you're being recorded, it's a public vote. If you do it online, you don't know what's going on. Yeah. So I know, this is not that big of a group. If people, people need to know now that the voting is going to happen on the 27th, and just plan to be there. That's my opinion.
So I lean towards what you're saying from a transparency standpoint. And I strongly lean toward what Kate's, it's like, come ready to vote. We're not going to discuss anything unless it truly is, I need a clarification. Clarification, vote. If it's 62%, it's not on the list. Let's move to the next one. All right, Christina.
I think people need to be in person. Like, I think that as much as possible, there's been folks that have come every time virtually, and that can be in person. I understand sometimes people can't be, but I think that's just going to make it a lot easier.
Yeah, so I think that also is a good ground rule. And, as Tiffany's saying, she's out of town that day. So, what I'll say to everyone who's still here, and I don't know if anyone's had to leave, is if you can be here on the 27th, please make every effort to get here. If you can't, please make every effort to be online the whole meeting so that we capture your vote. Pam, then Tim.
We're just, again, we sent around, Steve sent around the list of members with it very clearly defined who a member of this group is, and those are the people that are voting. So other people may have been online listening, but necessarily a member of the group. And of course, they're not voting.
Member group that's here on the 27th, or that's present on the 27th.
You have to be named.
But not the non-member present.
So I'm just looking, I want to make sure that I understand. It is I'm considering, right? Because we have this list of summary recommendations. I think they're based off the public testimony, and you see what kind of morph them all in. Where, I mean, we all put the yellow stickies up on the board a few meetings ago, and I'm curious, where are those? Because that was this group's first stab at coming up at recommendations for discussion based off of everything we'd heard up to that point.
Again, part of the messy process.
You
So,
evaluated all those.
yeah, so I did take a look at, so I did organize them. I think I sent those around after we had that meeting. And then I went back and looked at both the categories and the specific comments. Many of them were fairly broad kind of recommendations of what needed to be done. And I would say the vast majority of them aligned with what we were seeing and considering in the public testimony. Some were perhaps a little more specific or a little more nuanced, but in general, there was very significant alignment. Happy to send that around again to the group if you want to take a look at that.
Did you send it to
But
the
that's, I'm sorry.
Did you send it to the whole, or just the people?
In between the meeting we did it and the next meeting, I did send it out to the whole group. It may have gotten lost in the mix. I'm happy to resend it. But I think as a small planning group, what we prioritized is the public testimony. And I also think that a lot of the ideas that were generated that day were influenced by the testimony that we had heard so far. But if there's something really critical missing, I'm happy to recirculate that. And if if you want to bring that back up, happy to have us consider it.
Harped on it for first 3 or 4 meetings. I think the most non-political transformative thing this group could consider is committing to a program of continuous improvement. And I don't see that anywhere in what's been put in the recommendations. And I know it was one of the ones I put on the yellow sticky. I think where you have the data line up with the public comments, that's where you ought to be zeroing in and focusing. And it doesn't need to be, it's all stuff that can, within the process of running the business of operating ourselves, it can be completely apolitical. It can be, I just think that is something that I see missing from the recommendations the universe of recommendations that we're talking about, that over the long haul can yield leaps and bounds of improvements in the process by the people who are running the business of it. I see that's missing here.
So, I mean, that sounds like something, I mean, almost every organization I've worked with talks about the need for continuous improvement. That feels like a kind of a preamble in the report on kind of everything that we're doing here has to have kind of an ethos and commitment to continuous improvement. But at the level of a recommendation, it feels like it's maybe too broad. But I completely agree with you that the necessity of it in a process like this. But again, I will recirculate that list so everyone can take a look at it again. And if you think something really essential is missing that came out of that posted exercise, please bring it to our attention. Okay?
Also, this isn't as,
It's the meeting that never ends.
sorry, this isn't as, I don't know if it's intra-agency, I'm blanking on the word, but those like Excel sheets that we had that marked like, this is for the group, this is this agency, this is planning, this is council, those are all going to be attached to the report. So also when this group ends, each agency and council and planning will have all the testimony we got and see like which comment applies to who, or if it applies to two groups who need to work together, just so that information's still being passed on to who it needs to be if the group doesn't continue.
Right, and I'm going to, so in tab B, which is all the comments that came in that were not relevant to DR, but relevant to other important functions in county government, I'm just going to be reorganizing it around, so it's easier for an agency to say, oh, this is environmental protection, this is an interagency effort. So we're going to organize it so whoever does look at that list makes it makes it easier for them to kind of find the issues for kind of directly relevant to them.
And just to answer your question, Tim, the recommendations are the ones that we've all essentially coalesced around when we discussed these, when we went through each topic. That's what's coming out of it. And so that's what will be sent around for everybody to look at, and that's what will be voted on.
What Steve just said is we're supposed to look again at the stickies, see if there are things that we think are important that we didn't cover.
No, I'm talking about the recommendations that we are going to be voting on. The recommendations we're going to be voting on are the list of recommendations that we all coalesced around that we've already discussed, Meredith, internally, and we've been adding it through, like, so after today, whatever we essentially agreed upon will be added to that recommendation list, and that's what everybody will be voting on when we come through, when we're done with this.
That's what we've been discussing, and we think it evolved, okay? We started out with that idea, but the discussion evolved, and we can listen to the tape. I don't want to characterize it here, but no.
So wait, I'm just a little confused. So Meredith, are you saying now anyone in the work group, because I thought I heard Steve say he did not want this, that anyone in the work group can just now come forward with any recommendation they feel is missing and they want added? That's not what you're saying. Okay.
So what I'm confused about what you're saying.
All the recommendations need to be grounded in the record. Okay? We have a record. We haven't done a technical, formal of order and all that, but we have a record, and the record is all of the letters, testimony. It's what happened within this room when we met. And it also includes the stickies and the list that we got from that. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to discuss. And all of that is the record from which we can make recommendations.
So no, Meredith, that's not correct. We already went through the recommendations that came up in the testimony. We went one by one. What we said was any of the stickies, if you had a burning sticky that was related or that you wanted to talk about that was supposed to come up at that time. So I think what Steve is saying is if you still have a burning one that you didn't get to talk about, please bring it to our attention, but otherwise, at the next meeting. Otherwise, we've already gone through all of the testimony in all of those areas, and we've addressed every single thing that was talked about, and we've boiled it down to a few recommendations that then we will all actually vote on.
So let me just give an example of what Christine is saying here. So this is the list that I put up earlier today, right at the beginning of the meeting. Most likely, there's going to be 8-10 categories we never get to. That's not to say that the testimony that people made isn't important. That's not to say at some point, some group shouldn't take a look at it and figure out how to address it. But we're gonna be inundated with potential recommendations if people go forward into areas we haven't even discussed yet and start pulling out this comment or that comment.
That's not what Meredith is suggesting. She's saying if we've discussed it, then it's still open for recommendation. Not that if it hasn't been, if it's been discussed, then it's a closed matter and it's only a matter of voting, which is what I'm hearing from this side. Is that right?
We've gone through every single thing, though, is what I'm saying. We've been doing this for months, and we went through all the recommendations, all of everything that people said, and we discussed it at those meetings. So if you want to go back and re-listen to those meetings, please do. They're all recorded and online. But we came to general consensus on certain things. For things we didn't come to a general consensus on, we didn't put that down as a recommendation from the work group. So that's what we have a list of, and Meredith and Tom and me and Robert and Pam and Lavu meet on this multiple times a week. And we have a list that came out of those meetings of the things that there were general consensus on where we think that if we were to vote, we can move it forward. We didn't put things on the list that people didn't agree upon in here. So, but we've already discussed it all.
So again, just to be clear, so that the categories we've discussed are the ones that are highlighted on the screen up there, right? And next week, hopefully, we'll get to a few more, right?
Some really important ones on those, like, few more.
No, they're all, to me, they're all important.
Yeah.
What we're dealing with is a severe limitation of time, right? We've got one more 3-hour meeting in which to address categories, and then we've got a meeting where we're voting, and then essentially this group is done, and we're moving towards a smaller group writing a report. You know, at some level, I wish we could have found some way to do it, but I'm really not sure at this point how we can even come close to addressing the rest of the categories. I've got Diane and then Tom.
So I keep hearing the same thing coming up over and over again, and I just want to be clear. I'm only aware of one thing that you said, does the group have consensus on this? That was the SHA item. The rest of the items will be put to a vote. And I understand that there may be other people who are less than the full work group having meetings where they're having discussions, and maybe there's some other levels of agreements going on at that sub-cabinet level. But as a constructed work group, we each will vote on each of the items.
That's not what was agreed to. That was not what was agreed to.
That was agreed to by whom?
By us, Meredith. Because if we.
I'm not Meredith.
But Meredith asked the same question, and I'm
okay,
answering
good.
her, Diane. So the thing is, are you actually saying we should take that list of, what is it, 400 comments and vote on 400 comments? Because that's what it sounds like.
I thought that I heard Steve say at the outset that he's putting together a smaller list of items to be voted on, and that maybe I misheard it, and that he's going to be sharing that list by September 20th for us to look at.
Right, so right now, that list in terms of things that had general agreement around the table in previous meetings is like 11 or 12, maybe 10.
That's what I'm saying.
And we'll add a few from today from permitting and from public involvement. And next week we'll add however many we get from whatever categories I'm looking at a list of 20 plus or minus, right? It's not anywhere near the full list. It's everything that we've discussed where it seems like there has been general agreement that we're moving forward as a list.
I think a key point in that last statement seemed like this is a subgroup that came up with an effort to consolidate and state some recommendations, but it's still a subgroup. The whole group gets to discuss these subjects, and if they want to make adjustments or they think that there's some difference with what the small group thought characterized the agreement, then I think this is a big group, and they all have their own opinions, and they have to have the opportunity to adjust those.
So Tom, help me understand. So the meeting on the 27th to finalize recommendations is 2 weeks from now.
Right.
So I guess I'm not clear on then what are you suggesting how we build that list?
So you have already said 20 minutes ago, you're going to send out that list of recommendations so that everybody else can look at them, see if that coincides with what their judgment is of where there was consensus. And then if they think there's something that's missing that they thought was part of that consensus, or they think that those statements of the consensus don't quite capture a consensus, then the rest of the group can comment. I mean,
So I think that's totally fair. Yeah, that's totally fair to do that.
These aren't just they can't be written in stone without the whole group having.
Right, and that's not what we're saying, but what we're saying is we're going off of what I mean, otherwise, God, Tom, I would love all that time back that we've been spending
Me too.
trying to come to an agreement on this. We're going off of the list that our subcommittee has come up with, and we've talked about it extensively. And if people in the room, we don't get to make the decision for the greater body. Everybody else gets their vote. Everybody gets to say what they're going to say, but we're not going off of 400 comments because we don't have time for that.
I should note too.
It was to help organize the discussion and recommendations.
So-
Right. So just to be clear again, so that list is whatever it is, 10, 11, 12 right now. And there might be 4 or 5 that come out of today. We're going to have to kind of go back and look at the notes and see what rises to the level of, it felt like fairly solid and general agreement around the table. Add that to the list. We can circulate that. People can comment or propose edits on that. We'll send it out by the 19th, maybe close of business. On the 20th, we'll have further discussions, and there will likely be further recommendations to be added to that list based on the conversation this group has, and those will be added, and that will complete the list. I mean, again, we're dealing with a 14-day window here, and we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants, and we're still trying to schedule all the meetings that we need to deliberate internally to get us to the 27th. So we're going as fast as we can.
Just want to mention that, this whole uproar came up about when I started talking about intake. And yet it was the first bullet on the lead agency discussion. I mean, it's not like I came up with this, oh, guys, I just want to talk about intake. I just took the document that we were supposed to be discussing. And since things have been a little chaotic, and talked about the item that's right here. So
But I think part of
afraid of things.
I don't think it's fear, Meredith. It's that part of what I'm trying to do is address issues that we haven't talked about yet. That's part of my mission here. Issues we haven't talked about, and that seemed to be one that we may not have gotten to a point of clarity or recommendation on it, but we had ample conversation about it. That's all. Well, so that's my mistake that I didn't remove it.
I don't agree with you. I thought, we have been involved in a little, it hasn't been linear, let's put it that way.
Okay, we'll remove it so that there's no confusion next time.
I'm hoping it's almost 1 o'clock here. It was scheduled for 12:30. Let's wrap this up. Sharice, final comment?
For all intents and purposes, when I'm looking at these, we have talked about all of these things, not in the approach that we've taken to get to the recommendations, which is going through each person's public comment and speaking to it. I think there's an opportunity to look at them holistically. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. But they are kind of saying the same thing that a recommendation could be made for. So maybe if there is agreement that our approach to the public comment isn't to just go through each person's thing, especially for a topic as important as the lead agency. I know that this work group has talked about revisiting that document, editing it, and that it's going to be a sub thing or whatever. I mean, all that's a big deal. When I look at lead agency, it's like, who's in charge? Who's the authority of the lead agency is the big question. So I just make that recommendation that maybe to get through all of the things, it's not, hey, every single person that made a testimony, we're going to answer your testimony, which is not, that's a very ambitious goal we had. But in the interest of time, maybe we just consolidate the general consensus of what these people are saying and address it that way to get through it.
We've kind of been trying to do that. We added those bullets.
I think you did a good job of it. I think they did a great job of it.
Lead agency actually only has like
discuss it
5
here.
actual comments, and it actually did get 5 bullets because they were all pretty desperate. But,
Yeah, I mean, so yes, we have the summary bullets from all the categories, and we've all seen how long it takes to go through a single bullet, right? Every week I have this aspiration that, this should go quickly, and it almost never does. So, I think I mean, we can take this internally, but I'm not sure how else at this point, we have one more 3-hour meeting. That we change up the process that much and start drawing possible recommendations from categories that we never discussed. I'm, at least I'm not clear right now in my head how I would manage that, because it feels even more unwieldy than the unwieldiness that we have. If we had more time, I'd fully embrace that idea. I've
So-
got one more 3-hour meeting here.
Should we change?
What's wrong with Tom's proposal then? You put together the list of items that you think that that have been robustly discussed and actions that have come out of it, or that have suggestions, and then let everybody look at it and see if there's other things that should be added that we thought were not part of it. I mean, this is, a serious, to me, this is very much a transparency issue.
So, I mean, I agree with what Tom said. We're going to send out whatever list we have on the 19th before the meeting on the 20th. We're not going to discuss it at the meeting on the 20th, but we're going to give you now 7.5, 8 days to really kind of digest it. I'm hoping that later that week, after our meeting on the 20th, if you have significant feedback, either I don't think this belongs, or I think you missed this, or this is mischaracterized, whatever it is, to let us know, because we've still got to put together a final list that's going to come to the meeting on the 27th.
I just do think there should be a little bit of balance on that, but one, it should be something we've discussed. Two, I think where people can go to get some guidance on how did that discussion go. I don't quite remember. Either you rewatch or you read that Steve has taken really great notes. And so it's really taken great notes. And so that is what this internal group always relied on, were the notes, not our own memories, but like going back to the notes and saying, okay, what did we cover? What was said? Where did we land based on what has been recorded?
Nobody said, okay, we've discussed intake now. And anybody else have anything to say? Because we're not going to discuss it again. And we didn't do that for all the different things. And it doesn't mean
we didn't.
It's not open-ended.
But I just want to point out, Meredith, I had a game plan of talking about 5 categories today. We got through 1.5 or 2, right? So that means that there's even more to try to discuss on the 20th. So I don't know how to kind of, with this group, define time boundaries on people that we can stick to. But the bottom line is that whatever we get through on the 20th is where we end up. And that I think in good faith, the best we can do is try to identify the things that there's general agreement on by the group throughout our whole process. And that whether that list is 17 things or 26 things, then we do the best we can to get through that whole list on the 27th. And I like Christina's idea of making that a 4-hour meeting, just so we don't leave recommendations on the table. I don't want to get to the 27th, it's 12:30, and I'm on recommendation 21, and there's 6 more that haven't been voted on yet. If we can get through it in less than 4 hours, perfect. But it seems like we're shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't give ourselves ample time on that last.
So are we starting it early? Like, these aren't, I have another meeting to go to. 9:30 to 1:30.
9:30 to 1:30 is the general 4 hours we can.
Can't stay.
When it's a point that, like, I see this the entire time, like, it's a point that, like, always is a disagreement. And the discussion go around and around for 1 hour. If the discussion is about the same thing and the people is saying the same thing over and over again. Like, give us that limit, like, yeah, okay, you say it, let's vote. Because that is the only way that we can go.
On the 27th, you're saying?
No, not 27th, next
time too.
Yeah, because it's like, we will discuss for hours and never got a resolution, so let's decide, or leave it at both recommendations, different recommendations, and we'll both accept on the 27th. It's the only way that we can move forward. I think.
I'm doing the best I can, folks. I know. The more people can help me around the table of moving the group along, I am all in favor of it. So
everyone do a very good point.
Yeah.
But I mean, if we want to go through everything, we need to start being faster.
No, I think we need to acknowledge we're not going to go through everything. That's, I mean, if you look at where we are,
I know. But
we're not. So we'll have to figure out
but at least
how
we
it will
need
be
to go
addressed.
the maximum point that we can, and we cannot doing the things in every meeting.
Brief. Thank you all. Appreciate you. Appreciate your endurance in this process.